Lake Elmo Planning Commission, and because this is an announced meeting of both Planning Commission and Council, and there's a quorum of the council, we'll ask the Assistant Mayor to convene the council meeting.
Okay. I convene the Monday, October 13th joint meeting between the Lake Elmo Planning Commission and the Lake Elmo City Council to order.
Okay.
I'll hand it back over to Chairman Williams for the Pledge of Allegiance.
All right. We will start with the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. All right, so you've seen the agenda before you. Who's missing? Commissioner London.
She said she'll be late. She said she'll be late.
She'd be late, but she is coming. Okay, good. You've seen the agenda. Any additions or changes to that? There being none, we will accept the agenda.
I actually have
Oh, I'm
one, sorry.
yes.
I gotta find it though.
Agenda, not minutes.
Oh,
Not
sorry.
minutes yet. Minutes is next, okay?
Got it.
We'll accept the agenda as presented and move to the minutes of September 22nd. Mr. Dorfman.
Still looking.
I've got some. I'll start off page first, the first page at the bottom. I believe Johnson noted that the fire chief is the city's main public safety officer and had contacted the MPCA regarding the soil concentration, contamination. Did the MPCA initiate the contact or did the fire chief?
The fire chief.
Okay, so had contacted the MPCA. Next, Mr. Dorfman.
Page 2, second paragraph, it says Dorchner, maybe that's why I maybe don't remember calling it, maybe it was somebody else. The name spelled wrong, but he's the last sentence, he stated that he would check with the city attorney on this matter. I don't know who he is. I don't remember ever saying I would.
Johnson.
I would.
Johnson?
Yeah.
Can we just clarify that? Because I was
Yes.
confused.
Yep.
Anything else? Mr. Kramer?
I've got a couple. On the bottom of page 2, second paragraph from the bottom. Possible to move the proposed trail between the two ponds. And then here it says, and that a portion of the segment could be built as a boardwalk. That was actually where I'm suggesting it be moved, reduces the amount of boardwalk. And so if you change that, and that a portion of this segment could be built as a boardwalk, change that to, and this alignment would reduce the amount of boardwalk necessary.
Well, in fact, I believe I remember that Mr. Bloom did state that a portion could be built as a.
It would be less of a boardwalk if we moved it, I think is what. Oh, well, maybe I'm remembering wrong then.
Does anybody else recall, one way or the other? Mr. Johnson?
Just for clarification, I think Commissioners Kramer, are you stating that you said that would reduce the amount of boardwalk, not Ryan Bloom, but Commissioner Kramer?
Right, I think Ryan then said that if they had to over the spillway, that they could
Yep.
then put that as a boardwalk, but, I don't even remember who mentioned that it could be less, but it is less of a boardwalk if they move it. So I don't know if you wanna just look at that part of the meeting again, or
I can certainly do that.
just so it's
Okay
accurate.
with everybody? Okay.
And then on page 3, top paragraph, I think the intent was that the developer would inventory the trees that are outside the plat. I think that was the problem. So the trees to be impacted outside the plat along the northern border due to trail construction. It's not the trees within the buffer area because the trail there in that section is being built outside of the buffer area. It's being built in the park area, that was platted with Stonegate.
Aren't they talking about the trail construction though?
Yep. So it was looking at the trees that are from that in that first phase of Hamas Estates, the trail along back there that's going on the former parkland, or the parkland.
I thought this was like more to the west. Still within the first phase,
Yeah.
but more to the west, like
Right.
whatever that street is that comes.
Right,
out.
from Jewel there,
Yeah.
wherever, from Jewel there to, from Jewel to Keats, where the trail is in the parkland versus in the buffer area.
Oh, I see. So wouldn't it still be within the plat?
No,
Because
it's
the park
outside.
is part of the plat.
No, the park is part of the Stonegate plat, the original 10-foot trail plat. And that was the problem, because you don't have, because they didn't look at the trees that were in that parkland. And that was the whole point of that discussion, was that,
So impacted trees,
trees to be impacted outside the plat along the northern boundary.
everybody okay with that? Okay. I have one on that same page, down about the middle, where it says, Crimer expressed a strong preference for park location number 2. I wish the following sentence to be added. There was discussion about a potential safety hazard with a stormwater pond adjacent to site number 1. I think it makes it, putting that sentence makes the following motion a lot clearer. Okay? Next, anybody else?
I had one on page 4,
Or,
third
okay.
paragraph. I would argue that any community system is more expensive, not less, than public or single home.
In public, so it's more expensive than public or
Single home sewer.
single home sewer,
Correct.
okay. I have one further down that page, about 2/3 of the way down, where it says, Haggard asked about critical issue versus technical correction. I have no idea what that means.
In the, in how they were gonna present new packets, they were gonna highlight critical issues and break it down to critical issues and technical issues. And I just mentioned that I wanted to make sure that we saw all of the issues, whether they're critical or technical.
Okay,
And that, yeah, who's gonna make the determination as to if it's critical or technical, like, how do you decide what's what?
are you okay with the sentence as presented?
I think it's so minor.
Okay,
and,
all right.
I'm
That's
fine.
fine. That's fine. And then finally, on page 5, at the end of the actual paragraph there, deviation from city code that may not go through the variance process, but are, I like the words nonetheless inserted between are and deviations. And here's Ms. Lundgren, good. Okay. Any other changes, corrections, additions? All right. The motion to accept the minutes as amended.
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second?
Motion's been made and seconded to approve the minutes of September 22nd as amended. Any discussion? If not, all those in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed, no. Motion carried. Great. Okay. No public hearings. Move to our workshop item. Now, I expect this to be relatively informal, but we'll still try to maintain some decorum and not all speak at once, please. Okay, Mr. Klatt.
Thank you, Mr. Chair of the Planning Commission, members of the Planning Commission, Mayor, members of the City Council. I guess to restate what our chairman has stated already, this is a meeting for a workshop to discuss some kind of general long-range planning issues. And this was intended to be a meeting where the Planning Commission and Council could talk through some things that we don't always get a chance to talk through when we're dealing with development proposals. So taking a little bigger picture look at things, giving us a chance to maybe go through some comprehensive planning issues that, again, we don't get a lot of time to spend or discussing, I guess, at normal meetings. So again, it is going to be a little more informal. Just to lay the groundwork here, I think we are going to be talking through some development issues or status update here in the form of a workshop. The City Council, as you know, has been invited to participate in this workshop. The Commission is not being asked to take any action at this time tonight. This is, again, slated as a workshop meeting, and you are going to be encouraged to ask questions as we go through in the course of the presentation. So again, keeping it a little more informal versus listening to me talk for the entire night. I do have a presentation I want to go through just to kind of highlight some of the issues and comments that we've put down on paper in advance of the meeting as part of your report, and to put some of the maps up on the screen that we have in the packet. And again, hopefully that will help lead to some conversation, discussion. The other comment I want to make is that I know as we've kind of prepared for this meeting and talked about it, we have as staff received questions from council members and from commissioners and such. We are putting together kind of a frequently asked questions sheet that addresses some of those questions more specifically. We've tried to address a lot of those in the presentation or in the information in your packet. But again, knowing that there's going to be a dialogue back and forth here tonight, if there are some questions that we just can't answer tonight, we're going to be happy to kind of write those down and maybe put out a separate sheet that will kind of lay out some answers that to address some questions that may come up. So please keep that in mind as well. So just to kind of go over the information that you have in your packet. And again, I think we were trying to give you some information that will hopefully be helpful tonight as we go through and talk about some development issues and comprehensive planning issues. And also being conscious not to want to overload you with a lot of information. We tried to be somewhat selective in what we're giving you. So again, that wasn't intentional to try to avoid having some information in the packet versus not. It was just trying to keep it somewhat manageable. Again, if there's information you need, we're happy to provide that for you or get that for you as may be needed. So what you have in the packet then, first of all, is staff recently sent out an updated 2030 comprehensive plan to everybody to make sure everybody has it and has access to that plan, at least a hard copy of the plan. It's always available on our website, and we try to keep the most up-to-date recent version of the comp plan on the website for anybody that needs to go in and get it. So you have had that. That isn't in your packet tonight, but that's something we'll be talking about and referencing as the night goes on. We have a Lake Elmo development status map that staff has put together that identifies various developments that have been approved to date by the city or that we know are out there, and it also takes into account future development. So I'll be putting that up on the map and spending more time on that in a little bit here. We do have two maps that were used as kind of guiding documents or planning documents when the I-94 and village work groups are working on their comprehensive plan amendments. We want to bring those up again just so we can go back and take a look at those maps and see how the development proposals coming forward compare to those maps and what was planned for those areas. Then we have some other documents here from the Met Council that I thought were useful in terms of establishing a baseline for discussion tonight. One is that the Met Council has released a sheet that you have in your packet that summarizes how they will be reviewing comprehensive planning requests or comprehensive plan amendments in the interim before the city is required to submit a 2018 comp plan update. So basically, the Met Council's policy on reviewing comp plan amendments before we have to submit the next decennial comprehensive plan update, which I found to be very valuable and very informational in terms of the process. Secondly, I thought it'd be useful to at least have some of the background information about how Lake Elmo fits within the region and where we fit right now with the 2040 framework that was just recently released. I'll have a map showing that again, but hopefully giving a little bit of perspective on how the Met Council classifies various cities within the metro area and what the requirements are for those cities on a very high level. Obviously, the Met Council has a lot more information on their website. One of the other pieces of information we were thinking about including, but was just ended up being way too big of a document, so we'll give you a link to this after the meeting, is the planning workbook or the Met Council workbook they use that they provide for cities. That kind of goes through the process for updating comp plans. Again, it's a very valuable tool for us as staff to have in front of us. Again, it's a very long document though, so it's certainly something that we would encourage planning commissioners to peruse and look at on their own when you have time. And then finally, because we're going to be talking about the system statements that will be coming out in 2015, we thought it would be useful to provide you the most recent one that was adopted for the city, the 2005 system statement, which led up to the city's 2008 comprehensive plan update. This should give you a good idea of what's going to be in that 2015 statement and when it is released, and also give you a chance to look back at the 2005 statement to see what was in that document and really how that helped shape and how that kind of formed and led to some of the information and some of the requirements that went into our last comprehensive plan update. So that's just like the background for what we have in the packet. When we talk planning in Lake Elmo, we always like to start with this particular map because this is indicating and kind of breaking things down in terms of what we're talking about, and in particular tonight we'll be focusing on the Seward areas in particular. So again, what you'll see with this is that the bulk of the city, in accordance with our plan, remains rural, residential. We have areas that are guided for sewer development in the village and the I-94 corridor. And even this map is somewhat misleading because this map doesn't take into account open space areas in the village that are either planned for permanent open space or part of a rural buffer area around the village. And also in the I-94 corridor, we're not taking into account the Stonegate neighborhood, the forest, Midland Meadows, and some other developments that are guided for and intended to be left as rural development in nature. So that's always a good starting point. This is the city's future land use map. This is the most recent updated version that was adopted by the city. At the time, the village land use plan was adopted, so it includes the land uses that are planned for the village area, which we'll talk about in a little more detail here in a little bit, and also the land uses for the I-94 corridor. And throughout the course of the presentation, we're going to be going back and referring to the this particular land use map and this plan, and hopefully illustrating and documenting that as the city has been taking action on development proposals, that the city's been following very closely to the plan that was approved back in 2013 with the I-94 and village land use maps. So just kind of setting the stage here, first of all, staff wanted to make a few introductory points before getting into some of the nitty-gritty details of the what we'll be talking about tonight. So first of all, the 2005 Memorandum of Understanding between the Met Council and Lake Elmo has been terminated. I think that's a very, very important point to kind of understand and make clear for those that maybe haven't been following or maybe weren't aware of what's happening in the city. Obviously, you as planning commissioners and council are well aware of this. But I think from our perspective as staff, we believe this is really important because, one, it indicates that the city at this time has a comprehensive plan in place that is consistent and found to be consistent with the regional plan, which means it complies with all of our obligations to do planning within the metropolitan planning area that's controlled by the Met Council, and also that it's consistent with what the city ultimately envisioned for these areas as part of its work groups and part of its ongoing planning efforts. But the other reason this is important is, too, the city has taken steps to implement that plan. So in addition to adopting the plan, the city took steps to adopt a zoning ordinance that's consistent with the land use plan to allow for future development. The city began to implement its plan for extending services, including water, sewer, roads, et cetera, into planning areas. And all developments that are coming forward now are being reviewed for consistency with that overall plan. And then finally here, the city has provided plan to the Met Council or provided evidence that that plan was being implemented. Ultimately, by doing all those things, again, adopting a plan, implementing the plan, and then showing that the city was working towards implementation, it ultimately led to the release of the city from its obligations under the MOU, which again was a huge thing for the city. Now, what does that mean for the city? Which hopefully you all know. It means that, one, there are no more mandates in the plan. The city does not have to or is not required to achieve a set target population by a set date. This means, and what the key part of that was, that the city now will avoid any possible fines or inefficiency fees associated with a failure to carry out the plan or to carry out and build out the densities called for in that plan. In the packet, staff estimated real quickly that even with the current development projects ongoing and what we expect for development in 2015, that the city would have been hit with a fine of about $1 million at the end of 2015 if the city had not been released from the terms of that MOU. And that also is taking into account the fact that the city had amended that MOU with the Met Council and had gotten some flexibility to push back the timing on that. So it all kind of relates back to the idea that the city is still operating under a 2030 comp plan that had very specific and set targets in it, and that those targets are all tied to the MOU and the Memorandum of Understanding between the city and the Met Council. I think the other couple points we want to make on that is, one, is that the plan now is really just a guide for future development and a projection of what is most likely to happen. That doesn't mean that city can do away with that plan or get rid of it or veer away from it. We're still obligated to follow within the regional planning requirements, but it doesn't have the penalties or the kind of the mandates that were associated with the previous plan. Then secondly, the plan does allow for development consistent with these regional plans and has been found to be consistent with those plans. So,
Kyle, on the third point, the plan is still a guide that we have to follow, but the significant thing is the timing is
yes,
no longer in effect, right?
that is correct.
Yeah, okay.
Excuse me. So moving on here, in terms of kind of regional planning issues, and again, I want to take some time to go through this because I know we have several new planning commissioners that have not gone through the last planning process, and others that maybe just would like a little refresher here in terms of how the city needs to operate and must fit in with the overall region. Some of the council members I know have been through this process already, so bear with me as we go through this. But the city essentially last updated and went through the last major update to its comp plan in 2008. Now, the history of that is that given our decision or process to contest the Met Council back in 1998, when we would have originally had to submit a comp plan. We entered the MOU, and the MOU required the city to do certain things and update its plan. That led to a 2005 plan that really served as the basis for that update that was already, several years late. Now, fast forward to 2008, the city was also required to fall in line with the decennial updates, which were due in 2008. And so did begin an undertaking and did do a process to update its plan to bring it into conformance with the 2008 requirements. The city did not update the land use plan at that time, but did go through and update some of the major sections, including transportation, stormwater, water supply, implementation, and other resources and resource protection. So it was a fairly major undertaking to update that plan. Everything for that plan update was finished in 2010. That plan ultimately was accepted by the Met Council, but there were a couple things that were still lacking in that plan that needed to be updated for us to fully comply with all requirements. And I think the big thing there is that the Met Council fully expected the city to update the village plan for the village area and to go back and adjust the land use plan based on current trends, current conditions, and requirements. So the city undertook that process then in roughly 2011, 2012, formed the I-94 and Village Task Force and work groups, and began the process to bring that plan up to date with all requirements. And so in 2013, the city did adopt a formal update to its land use plan that kind of wrapped everything up and brought everything into compliance with where we needed to be. So that really forms then the bulk of the comp plan that is the plan we have in place now. Is this plan that's been really started in 2005, was updated in 2008, then further updated in 2013. So I guess the long and short of it is that we've always been a little behind the 8 ball when it comes to planning within the region and meeting regional obligations. So as we start getting ready for the next round of updates, we want to be very careful and make sure that we are consistent and planning far enough in advance to make sure we're hitting these targets and hitting these dates that we need to hit. So the 2030, and the point here is that the 2030 plan that we call the plan that has all these things in it is the regulatory document for the city that guides future development, and this is what we're obligated to follow. The next update, as I say here, is due in 2018. This is part of the decennially updates going back to 2008, and will be preceded by a release of system statements for Lake Elmo in 2015. So prior to doing the updates or requiring the updates, the Met Council will provide system statements for all communities that provide for the policies and guiding requirements for all communities in the metro area that are specific to that particular community, and all those requirements must be incorporated into the plan update that goes forward in the future. The other kind of point here is that preceding the system statement release in 2015 is this release of the updated forecast for 2040. And so it's kind of, as you see as we go through this process here, there's various steps that are followed and kind of must be adhered to in order to stay on task and meet requirements. So to summarize here, the Met Council releases the forecast every 10 years. After the forecast, the Met Council releases a system statement that's specific to each community. Once the city receives that system statement, it has a certain and limited amount of time to submit an updated comp plan to the Met Council.
And Kyle, we can request a reduction in population with that system statement, right?
We always have the opportunity to request amendments or revisions to that system statement. That is correct. So we'll get a draft document to look at and comment on prior to the formalization and finalization of that document. That is correct. Thank you, Dean.
Yeah.
Kyle?
Yes.
How does that one thing the document that we just got that says that we have to reduce population, or we can reduce it to 2,100, 21,000?
Yep.
How does that fit in to this?
The number is 20,500, and that is the forecast or regional forecast. So again, the process is that prior to this kind of decennial planning process, the Met Council will release a revised forecast for the region, which then gets broken down by individual communities within that region. So in our case, there's the population forecast, and Lake Elmo gets apportioned its share of that overall regional growth, which in this case is 20,500. That's the number, that's the population number that we show. Back in 2005, when that system statement was released at that time, that number was 24,000. So that it has dropped then from that forecast from 10 years ago. Now the next step in that process is going to be the release of the system statement, which will be incorporating that 20,500 number and the household number into that system statement, along with a whole series of other issues that are regional in nature, including transportation, wastewater, parks, and those sorts of things that need to be integrated with our comp plan. Once we receive the revised system statement, which again is due in the late 2015, that kicks off the city's requirements now to submit an updated comp plan to the Met Council. Yes.
On this slide, the updates to the comprehensive plan, besides planning for our own purposes, the comprehensive plan also has to dovetail with the Met Council. But within that, we've got transportation, water supply, surface water management, special resources, et cetera. What, do all those report up to the Met Council, or are they different state agencies? Do the demands conflict?
All those plan elements are submitted to the Met Council for review. And then within the Met Council, they have various entities or portions of their organization that review those specifically for things like transportation, wastewater, et cetera. As part of our drafting that plan update, we will ask and have other agencies review it that are impacted by those particular plans. So if it's a transportation plan, we will be reviewing that with Washington County, with the state, and with other agencies that are involved in this review process. If it's wastewater, obviously the Met Council is going to have a say in that. If it's water supply issues, the DNR is going to have a chance to weigh in on that. So with any comp plan update we do, we're required to submit that to either adjacent communities or adjacent municipalities or other agencies that are impacted by those plans and efforts. So there will be a more, again, as we update these plans, there's a more comprehensive review and comprehensive review process with it.
Because what was going through my mind is the watershed district kind of demands that we set aside for each plat areas for holding water, and that takes away from some of our densities. So it seems like we're kind of walking a tightrope in some cases as far as density versus holding back the water.
Yep.
But
And as you'll hear us talk about a staff too, is that when we talk about doing a major comprehensive plan update, it's not something that's done just in a little box somewhere, kind of separated from everything else. It's intended to be a comprehensive plan. That's why it's called a comprehensive plan. So you're taking into account all various aspects that could impact development. So it's a very good point that as you work towards these major updates, you want to be involving those agencies and entities in that process, taking into account any regulations or restrictions or requirements that could impact the city's ability to implement its plan. So I think that's a good point.
Just one thing to add, Kyle, to that, kind of a nuanced point of process, but the Met Council, to Commissioner Dodson's question, is how are they getting feedback from all the other agencies? It's not just city by city. It's actually happening that the Met Council will have a regional housing policy plan or a regional transportation plan. And so those plans are actually being vetted through the various counties and other state agencies, I mean specifically MnDOT, as those regional plans are being adopted. And then the system statements are really a reflection of those adopted regional plans that get adopted to each specific jurisdiction. So a lot of those things are being vetted out many years ahead of the actual publishing of the system statement. That makes sense.
Thank you, Nick. And it's also worth pointing out, too, that when we submit a major update to the Met Council, one of the requirements is that we have to check off that agencies that need to review the plan have reviewed it. So in the case of a major change to our water supply plan, we need to show evidence that the DNR has signed off on that particular plan or has reviewed that plan. If it's a plan that impacts watershed districts, the watershed districts have to sign off on that plan as well. So in many cases, it's a requirement of our approval that we go through that and get appropriate approvals or reviews done by those agencies that have an opportunity or should have an opportunity to review the plan.
Yes, Mr. Larson.
And there, there are several things that just sort of layer over, the plans and the densities and so on. Another one would be the airport. And I know one of the things is to tilt the runway for the airport so that, the runway would run exactly right over our house. So from a personal standpoint, I'm certainly interested. But there are things like that. There are going to be, a lot of adjustments, and which leads me to one other thing that sort of plays into this, but isn't really mentioned, is the fact as we plan a downtown area, and I know a lot more is going to be said about this tomorrow night at what is it? Okay, here in Lake Elmo. What type of, density will be needed to maintain a downtown area? Because you need to have so many households, within walking distance, within driving systems to make it viable. And is there any point at which we are actually working on those numbers as well? And, and it's another piece that I think should be tracked and considered directly in discussions.
Yes, and I think we'll have a little more of a conversation on that particular issue tomorrow night when we talk specifically about the downtown, and we're happy to do that, you know, as the course may come up here with this meeting as well. I do want to piggyback on some of those conversations too, because I think those are very good points about, you know, as you do a land use plan, there are a lot of other kind of factors that come into play in terms of what can actually happen with the land, which is a big reason why when you look at a plan like Elmo's, we're using density ranges to identify various types of land use categories. And part of that recognizes that, you know, we don't really know when we get to a specific piece of property what is appropriate or what could be, you know, development capacity for that site until we start taking into account wetland areas, stormwater requirements, transportation needs, all these other factors that come into play with a comprehensive plan. So I know we've been questioned a lot about, you know, why are we using these ranges? What happens if we build out at the high end of these ranges? But that really is a key part of a comprehensive plan like Elmo has, where you know, I think the density ranges recognize that you're just not going to be able to take a site and be able to tell, you know, 30 years in advance what the development might be on that site, not knowing what the regulations are or restrictions might be on that particular piece. So a lot of the information and a lot of the requirements are in the details.
Okay, and just one other piece that fits into that mosaic too is, you know, if you have to have more development to make an area viable as such, you know, what's going to happen with the parks? Because, you know, it seems like we're in suspended animation, you know, in the city in terms of, you know, having ball fields and, you know, a major park area that will be a center for organized activities. And, you know, because we have to, you know, you need to have enough people for a downtown area, but at the same time, you know, while we're developing, we need to set enough aside and organize it well so that we have the social amenities for our population.
Yep.
Okay.
All right, so just the final point here is that we want to make is that, you know, all amendments prior to the release of this updated system statement will be reviewed under the current plan and need to be and are required to be reviewed under that plan. So I guess we want to keep that in mind as we kind of work through this information, this document. Now, just a little more specific about the system statement. Again, I think I've talked about this a little bit, but, you know, beginning in early 2005, once that draft document's released, the city can choose to have amendments to the comp plan reviewed under either the 2030 or 2040 system statement. So again, for most cities, it doesn't make that much different. For Lake Elmo, there is going to be somewhat of a difference there because we're talking about either a 24,000 number or 20,500 number. So once we get to January 1st, 2016, all amendments must be reviewed under that 2040 statement. And then all amendments as well need to be consistent with those regional plans in addition to the overall population forecast and other information. So I just wanted to put this up here again too, that, you know, and again, you have the 2030 system statement in your packet. The 2030 population target was 24,000, 8,727 households. This is a number that's been repeated, you know, quite a bit in Lake Elmo because it was tied into the MOU and some other things, and we reference this in our current plan. For 2040, that population number is 20,500. The household number is 8,000. So that is the reduction that Lake Elmo has received and will be getting as part of that updated document. So I want to just put those numbers out right now so you're clear on those.
Maybe you'll get into this further, but those numbers don't make sense. The first 2030 statement, 24,000 divided by 2.75, which is number of people per household, is 8727.
Mm-hmm.
But 20,500 divided by 2.75 is nowhere near 8,000.
Yep, and those numbers did.
So where does, how do we know that households number is going to come in at that level? And,
I don't think-
And what does that mean for us?
Yeah, nobody knows
Oh,
what that
okay.
number is going to be, you know, until we have the 2030 census done. You just don't know. So what we have is the forecast from the Met Council, and that forecast was changed from what the persons per household number was when the 2030 system statement was put together. So it is a change from what we were dealing with in addition to the population and household numbers.
So it implies that the number of people per household that Met Council is planning for is going to drop significantly.
That's exactly what it's implying.
Okay. All right. Yeah.
So if what I'm taking, and I did the math, I had my phone turned off, so I had to do it by hand. That number of 20,500, you should be taking exactly 1,270 rec units off the total of 8727. So if you take 8727 and you subtract the 1270, that would be the households that you would have to come up with for a population of 20,500. Very simple math would be
7455 is what I got. 2.75 into
Yep.
20,500.
74, yeah, so that households there should no longer be 8,000. That household number should be 7,455. I think you're exactly correct.
It- Well, it depends on whether they're taking households as the given or number of people per household as given.
Well, we vied for
'Cause
the
the other one has to be
2.7.
adjusted accordingly.
Right, and we vied for the 2.75, and I do believe that that was one thing that they said they were gonna agree with. I don't know, you'd have to ask,
As part of the system statement discussion that we're having with them, so, yeah.
So I guess
One
we
of the
just don't
biggest-
know what's gonna happen yet.
one of the biggest negotiations that we had over the years with Peter Bell was that 2.75. That is a key number. And even getting rid of the MOU, you would never sell yourself short as a city and say, we're gonna get rid of the MOU, but we're gonna take 2.15 as our new number, because you're gonna increase the population then. You wouldn't do that. You would vie for your 2.75 and remain consistent with your 2.75.
And it's at 2.56 right now, so, right? That's what it is?
Yeah, and just the background quickly for the planning commission, I think that maybe didn't deal with this more specifically, but the city did comment back on the updated 2040 forecast and argued that the overall numbers, households and population, should be lower than what it was. We ultimately got, I think, a compromise from that council in terms of somewhere in between what our 2030 number was and what they originally were planning for Lake Elmo, or originally forecasted for Lake Elmo as part of their draft statement. So that's something we've talked to them about. When the system statements come to us, we'll have an opportunity to comment on that. That most likely will be one of the comments we have is that persons per household number and how they're calculating it.
Councilmember Smith is correct, Mr. Chairman. We've kept that 2.75 number in front of them all the time. They understand that, so.
Okay.
Do they discuss how many households have to be sewered versus non-sewered? Did they take that into consideration when they're giving this? Because we have the unique city of not being fully sewered.
Well, in the current comprehensive plan, yes, it does take into account. It has very specific areas, and we calculated
Oh,
out
and I
based
know
on
that,
that.
but I'm saying
With the
over-
2040 update, no, we're not going to have to be that specific. Now, there's a certain minimum expectation for density within these areas, and then we have to be working towards a plan that achieves the overall population growth total. So it gets built into it, but it's not something that's explicitly called out.
So more or less in a normal city, you would just have to meet your 3 units per acre average
Yes.
overall. Okay.
That is correct.
Where are we at right now?
For average,
Yeah.
we haven't really
Sewered
calculated.
areas.
For the sewered areas,
Yeah.
it's less than 3 units per acre in those sewered areas. I don't have the exact number in front of me, but it's certainly something we could find out.
Yes.
Something I'd like to point out, though, is that you don't, when we did this comprehensive plan in 2005, we were accounting for using all 1,000 acres in the old village, or 934 acres in the old village, and using all 1,300 acres down on I-94. There was 300 and some odd acres that were gonna be used for business recs and 1,000 for housing recs. In order to hit the number that's technically required now, you would never use all 1,000 acres on I-94. In fact, you'd only have to use 643. So first come, first serve. For people who, are developing that first 643 acres are gonna get, the average density is going to be 3 units per acre, and everybody else, well, sorry, Charlie, it'll be done. That's the way you have to look at it, because you're not gonna put 3 units per acre now on the full 1,000 acres, which is what we had actually intended to do when we were doing the 3 units per acre, was putting the 3 units per acre across all 1,000 acres. That has been changed when the statement was changed, or the comp plan was changed, to put these ranges on. These ranges made things much more complicated. It didn't simplify it, it complicated it, because now you've got higher areas here and higher areas here, and areas over here that might get nothing.
Are
Because
we-
in the end, once you hit that target number to reach your households and your population, you got open land still they're gonna wanna develop. And what do you do with them? Say, oops, sorry.
Are we restricted by the number of recs?
We're not restricted by the number of recs.
Then
but
it's a
we're-
non-issue.
Well, it is an issue. If you're an elected official here, it's a big issue, because the technical, if you knocked on every door, you know that they don't want all the extra recs. They fought many years ago to have no recs. And the deal was to take as few as possible. Why would you go against what the people in your city want and put in more recs than you need? It's actually supposed to be the opposite way. We're supposed to be fighting for the people who wanted to stay rural, and we had to take development. Now, if we have to take development, let's
Where are we at in the agenda?
You don't
Chair?
get to call point of order, do you?
Well, we're
I'm just
still,
kinda wondering where we're at in the agenda. It seems like we're kind of already going to the rec, so we're gonna finish this, or?
Yeah, I think it might be useful for me to go through, just because I do have the
Question here.
development updates here next, so that'll be helpful to at least understand what we've been doing, what the plan says, those sorts of
yeah, I
things.
think, Mr. Klatt did say we could entertain questions during the presentation.
Seems like we're
Um,
straying from that,
I
but
think-
that's my opinion.
Well, I think Councilmember Smith made a good point, and I think we need to discuss it further.
So my
But let's-
question along that discussion is, to you, I guess, is from a practicality standpoint, we can't hit just, you know, a perfect number, because that's impossible, right? And so there's gotta be some range that even with your example, there's gotta be a range in there somewhere that we should be able to target.
Right. And in the 2005 comprehensive plan, when we wrote that plan and we knew that we had 1,000 acres to develop, we didn't have those ranges. What we did is we were going to allow the market to determine. So if this particular parcel, this is what Woodbury does.
But isn't that our approach now, is having the market determine what's coming forward?
Well, no, not necessarily, because you have opposing odds. You have what the market wants to do. You also have what the residents of Lake Elmo have the right to ask for. And
Well,
what they
sure, I mean,
ask for-
I know what they're asking for, but at the same time,
How do you afford the infrastructure?
yeah.
you
Okay,
afford- That's a whole
yeah,
different topic,
Well,
because I don't think
Oh, not
that's.
really.
I think it's a related topic, but I think we ought to let Mr.
that
Klatt
would be
finish
going-
his
Yeah.
presentation, or at least proceed.
And I think some of those.
But let's not give up on that discussion, okay? We need to come back to that. Mr. Pearson?
Just, if I make, so it was 3.5 exactly across the board, if that's what you're proposing, that the.
No, it's 3.
Or back 3?
Average is 3,
It was 3.
yeah.
Okay,
that's an
what's
average.
Some
three?
land would have had some development, and other land wouldn't. I mean, it
Right,
had to
but I
be an
mean-
average.
Yeah, it has to be, and if it has to be, I don't, if I'm not mistaken, staff can correct me, you're not gonna get a 2.4 or a 2.3 rec, which is what some of these have been coming in at, past the Met Council, right? So you have, that's the idea
would.
behind the ranges.
You would, because you'd have some areas where it might be 4. You might have one building on a 10-acre parcel, or that was the whole point of the process of saying, we need to put in 3,200 rec units down on I-94.
Can we get, can
And what's
we
the
get,
difference?
can we get 3, could you get a 2 per sewer acre from the Met Council? Did the Met Council approve as an area of 2 recs per acre?
If you were submitting an individual project that was coming in at 2 units per acre, it probably wouldn't be approved without something else in the plan that says that there's gonna be higher density somewhere else. Now,
course.
if it was a large enough piece of property and the developer was, developing it so that they were doing some areas at low density, some much higher, then it would balance out, then it would be okay.
What I'm gonna say is, could you present a plan that's got this area, this 100 acres here, there's no development in front of you, go to Met Council, could you present it? That's our land use, 2 acres per, or 2 units per acre.
No, no,
That's my point, I don't think the Met Council would take it.
no, that's not meeting regional
You'd
requirements.
have to bump up, you'd have to do ranges, or you'd have to call it higher than what it is. That's my understanding, it's all I really wanted to respond to. But
And my whole point, Mayor, was that when you had 1,000 acres for housing and you only need 3,200 rec units, you could have put in 3 units per acre and everyone would have gotten a fair share of the pie. What happens in a lot of communities is that is picked and chosen. This farm gets developed because they want to do this development, you're gonna stay a farm, and you don't ever get to develop it. That's what happens.
Wow.
And the fair way, at least from what the council was thinking at the time, with 3.2 units per acre or 3,200 rec units, is that everybody would get roughly the same density, which was 3.2 units per acre. That's what the numbers would have told you if you would have started with 6,600 and subtracted out what you needed. It was 3.2 units per acre, and every piece of land down on I-94 would have gotten the same exact,
Well, okay.
yep. So that's,
The fact is, we do have ranges now. They are part of our code. They're part of the approved procedures that we're following. And until the planning commission and council decide to change that, that's the way we're operating. Now, Mr. Larson, you have something quick? Otherwise, let's,
Yes, just a question, maybe it's a Dean question. Isn't 3.0 a magical number because that's the point where the sewer system that we're building now pays for itself? And if you have less than 3.0, there's gonna be a larger,
No,
debt
our
service
sewer
on the
system-
individual?
Our sewer system pays for itself right now roughly at 2.4,
It
2.5.
does. So the 3.0 doesn't have a financial implication.
It made to a developer, but not to the city in terms of what we would be collecting for SACs right now. I know that we have talked to a lot of developers, we tried to push that range down to 2, and we've been told by a lot of developers, 2 is right on the break-even line for them, for sewer and water. Roughly when I think the planning commission or members that were around might remember we did that market study a while back, and we sent it out to you, and it was pretty much falling right at the 2.5
yeah,
per acre level, so.
okay. Mr. Klatt?
Yeah, we can come back to that point. The one map I did want to put in here, I did give you the regional kind of plan that shows kind of how different communities are classified in the Met Council. This has been updated. This is the 2040 Thrive document, so they've added some categories. And I want to put it up here because I think it illustrates kind of how the Met Council at least views Lake Elmo within the context of the broader region, and it is a little different than how they've been viewed in the past. So that now if you look at Lake Elmo, the areas that we have, and I'm sorry this map kind of shows up very lightly, but the areas that are guided for sewer development in Lake Elmo are these lighter yellow colors. They're consistent with the emerging suburban edge. So that's a different kind of terminology. And the reason the Met Council does that is to kind of classify communities that are going through similar kind of growth issues or development issues. So you'll see we're kind of classified with communities like Ramsey and Dayton and Farmington down here, Rosemont, Prior Lake, out west, I think we have Chaska, Waconia Township, that area just to the west of Minnetonka, Chanhassen, and so forth. And then within each of those, each community is required to or must meet a certain threshold for development within those sewered areas. Out at the suburban edge or emerging suburban edge, it's 3 to 5 units per acre is the council's expectations. Once you start getting in some of these core cities, closer into the inner ring suburbs and the core cities, that number goes up quite a bit. So now you're looking at minimums of 5 units per acre or even higher for minimum densities to serve development. The other piece here is it does show that Lake Elmo as a whole, predominantly, is located within the diversified rural area, which means we have the ability to kind of control that and use that or plan for that to be rural areas on a more permanent basis. So you have a little more information in your packet on this. We can certainly go back to that if there's any questions about some of the regional planning documents. Now talking more and focusing more on Lake Elmo obligations, just kind of to follow up from those regional issues. So right now, the city must plan for a population of 24,000 until the updated system statement is released. So again, we're looking at late 2015 for that document to be finalized. Throughout early and mid 2015, we'll be reviewing a draft document. So over that period of time, the city is able to regulate growth using the staging plan, and we did adopt, the city did adopt a staging plan as part of its comprehensive plan. I'll have that up on the map here a little later and talk about that in a little more detail, but that is one of the regulatory tools the city has that can regulate and control the pace and timing of growth and development in the city. That's something the city did incorporate as part of its plan, and it's definitely a document that gives the city some flexibility or some authority over when developments come forward. And then the final point here is that the city must plan, we've talked about this, must plan for densities at a minimum level of 3 units per acre throughout all of its sewered areas. Nearly all development that's been approved to date falls below that number. And so that's consistent with the overall comp plan, which did guide areas for lower densities in the 2.5 to 4 range, with other areas a little higher than that, going 4 to 7.5 and 8 and on up. So the city, and I think the main point here is that regardless of where the numbers fall with the regional framework, the city will need to plan for higher densities somewhere, either as part of the 2030 or the 2040 framework. Even with the lowering population, that still isn't consistent with the overall guidance and requirements that we maintain 3 units per acre throughout that development or throughout these sewer development areas. And there are some little asterisks, I think, for Lake Elmo, because if you look at the village, that's not going to develop at that 3 units per acre. That is kind of an exception to the overall requirements, but that kind of goes back to our MOU and the adoption of the plan back in 2013. So other obligations under...
When you say the developments that have been approved so far,
Yes.
what is your definition of approved? Final plat?
No, the ones that have been approved, at least in a concept plan stage so far.
Even concept plan?
Yes.
Okay.
Yep.
So even the Inwood one, doesn't that come up to?
That is the one
that's
development
over?
that's slightly over 3 units per
Yeah,
acre.
okay.
That's it. Otherwise, the rest of them will all come in either right at 3 or a little under 3 units per acre for the most part. So moving on here, other observations. The city has been taking action over the past year to perform what we're terming functional rebalancing as opportunities arise. And the reason we're using the term functional rebalancing is because that indicates that what we're doing isn't a significant or major update to the comp plan, but rather is looking at opportunities where we have some opportunities or some ability to look at reductions or modifications to the plan where it's appropriate and where it makes sense given market conditions, given the city's objectives, and so forth, as long as those changes are consistent with the overall plan and with the overall regional plan. So that's one issue. Secondly, the city will not be able to plan for these 2040 forecasts until after the system statement was released in 2015. Again, sorry to be a broken record there, but that's kind of the situation we're operating under. Major updates to the plan will need to be considered in conjunction with all other aspects of the plan. So I think if the city does decide that we want to take some action to look at some major revisions to our plan, which the city always has a right to do, once we get to a certain threshold where we're considered a major update to the plan, the city should be looking at these other aspects of our plan. So if we're updating our land use because we want to look at either changes in densities or change in the location of development, the city should also be looking at our transportation plan, our water supply plan, our stormwater plan, all these other elements that come together to make up that overall comprehensive plan. So I think the point staff wants to make there is that as we look at making bigger changes to the plan, that's going to lead to a bigger process and a more lengthy process to go down that road because now we're bringing in other aspects of the plan that should also be looked at. And the last point here is that the city has made significant investments in infrastructure to serve new development, and that these investments have been based on an assumption that we'll have a minimum level of development in order to help pay off those investments over time. And we had a brief conversation about kind of what our minimums are for what we're hearing from developers and what we need to see in some of these areas in order to accomplish that.
The very first bullet item,
Yes,
what actions have we been taking?
I'll have a separate slide here in
fine.
just a couple minutes.
Mr. Kramer?
So here you say the city will not be able to plan for the 2040 forecast until after the system statement is released later in 2015. But what about, how does that correspond with it? From early 2015 until January 1, 2016, you may choose to have your comprehensive plan amendment reviewed under either the 2030 or the 2040. So couldn't we choose to have, from early 2015, couldn't we choose to use the 2040 forecast?
I think we could. The problem is that forecast obviously isn't going to be finalized until later in that year. So there's some wiggle room there where you could see some changes. So I guess it kind of depends on how drastic of a change we're expecting as a city and what we're asking for in terms of changes.
And perhaps what reaction we've gotten from, informally from the Met
Yes,
Council
exactly.
in our discussions up to that point.
Yes.
Mr. Reed?
Thanks. And the plans have to be consistent with the forecasted growth?
Yes. Yes.
Ms. Hager?
So if we went by the 2040, or if council chose to go by the 2040 forecast, or population, it's a 35-year plan. Will there be enough time to make adjustments like that might possibly occur in those 10 months or whatever? If there's adjustments next fall in the system statement, do you expect the adjustments to be that big that 10 months worth of decisions is gonna affect it that severely? Or that we wouldn't have 35 years to recover?
Yeah, probably not. I think that ties into some of the conversation later on here that I'm going to have about the staging plan, that I think that there's a lot of concern, amongst the city council and the planning commission that, we do want to take a little bit of time to look at this. Then I think we regulate development through that staging plan. As I state in the report, we've approved roughly a third of the development total within the I-94 corridor right now as part of our development concepts coming forward. Generally, developers are looking at a 5 to 10 year build out within the areas they're either doing a preliminary plat or concept plan on. So I think we're already talking. What we're really talking about is the first third, of our development cycle, both in terms of numbers and timing. But the city does have some ability to accelerate that if we have projects coming in that we, or as a city as a whole, believes are good projects. So I think it kind of depends on what we're dealing with and what we're going to respond to in the future.
Okay.
So I think we can come back and talk about that a little more. So in terms of development activity, then we want to spend a little bit of time talking about current development and where things stand with the comp plan. We just point out here that to date, the city's reviewed 9 larger development projects at a concept or later plan stage. There's one that we've seen a rough sketch on that we are kind of counting in our numbers just because we know, have a pretty good understanding what's going to happen on that site. That's the Pratt site on Lake Elmo Avenue. The city's approved 2 commercial projects outside of Eagle Point Business Park. That's Quick Trip site and then the Reagan Air Lake Development Project on Lake Elmo Avenue, which has not proceeded beyond the concept plan yet. We have given you a development activity map that we think does a good job of summarizing just kind of where things stand within the community. And the other point here is that almost all of it, with very few exceptions, has occurred within the city Stage 1 planning area, as was approved by the City Council for development. So this is the map that you have in here, and this is a blow-up that pulls some things out. Just to quickly go over it and summarize it, what you see in blue here are areas that we know are under contract, but that have not come to the city in some sort of sketch plan or concept plan review. The elements in orange here are all developments in areas that have gone through at least a concept plan stage. So it includes Inwood development, Wildflower at Lake Elmo, and then the Air Lake development down here, which obviously doesn't have a residential component. The yellow areas are areas that have been approved at a preliminary plat stage. And then the green areas are developments that have received final plat approval. Then with this, what we're showing with the different designation of the text in here is if it's white and there's a number behind it, that signifies a project that has received approval from the city, where we have known development plans, and then the number, at least the most latest, greatest number, as per the city approvals on those particular sites. So for instance, with Inwood down here in the corner, this signifies that this is the project that's got concept plan approval. It's a definite number we know about and project that has approval from the city. Then the overall housing unit total in there is 537 units. So as we go across the corridor, hopefully again this kind of summarizes it hopefully in a way that makes sense. So you have Inwood, Boulder Ponds at 163 units, Hamas Estates at 163 units, Savona at 310 residential units for that, at least the area to the west of Keats Avenue. Now, once you get to the middle portion here, this is a Stage 3 planning area. There are no developments that are pending here. We do have, and what we're doing with this is showing roughly what the estimate would be based on the comp plan for dwelling units within those particular areas. So it includes Hamas Estates East, the Duro property, Napigu Farms, Casperson, their property, again, between Lake Elmo Avenue and Keats Avenue. And then within those areas that are subject to future developments will be the Dale property. Within Dale property, there is some multifamily development areas, and that's, if you look at the comp plan, we're looking at roughly 200 units in there. Then finally, once we get to the east of Lake Elmo Avenue, this is Stage 2 planning area. The city did approve Hunter's Crossing as a development to be accelerated within the Stage 2 area, so we know that there's 51 units in there. Otherwise, we have a very large area up here that's guided for high-density housing, so you'll see 891 units tied up with that particular site. So a good portion of the city's future development units for residential construction is kind of tied up in this high-density area over here on Manning Avenue and just south of Oakland Junior High. And then finally, you have the Dietrich property, which is the property that Pratt's been looking at. Again, just giving a number there as well. So that's kind of the I-94 corridor. Same kind of issue or same kind of logic in the village area. So again, the known projects in the village are the Village Preserve, Wildflower at Lake Elmo, Easton Village, and then Village Park Reserve. So when you add those totals up in the village, I'll get to that in a little bit here and show you that. And then we have 2 projects that are really uncertain at this point that are still out there. We know are pending. That includes Gagne West, so that piece of land that's located north of the Shokin Farm Estates, and then all the land that's owned by both Screeton and Easton Village north of the railroad tracks and south of Highway 5. And then finally, staff has been, for purposes of doing projections and talking through comprehensive planning issues, has been kind of following a methodology for calculating just an estimate for what the city might see within the village mixed-use area. We've been doing that by taking, and Nick, you may need to help me out on this because you've been doing these numbers, looking at assigning half the development area for mixed use for housing. So assuming that half that area is going to develop for mixed use, and then multiplying that by the lowest density multiplier that we use for village mixed use, which is 4 units per acre.
It was 6.
6.
But now it's 5.
5 units per acre. Thank you, Nick.
Since the density gap refinement.
So doing that, we end up with a number of about 200. And I'll have some summaries here that'll show kind of where things stand then in relation to the overall totals and so forth. So we can come back to this map if we need to. Be happy to put that back up.
Is that Cimarron just the hookups? They're not adding anything extra?
Cimarron, no. This is an area within Cimarron that's slated for medium-density residential development. So it's part of the mobile home court that is available for future development. So we're estimating within that area that there's roughly, I think we show 99, close to 100 units in there. And if you go back to the city's approval of Cimarron, there's always been, and they've always had kind of a future phasing plan for the area that isn't presently, that they own, that isn't presently occupied by mobile homes. And I know in the past they've talked about either an expansion of the mobile home court or some other type of product that would be townhouses or something of that nature. So, and again, we can come back to this. I just want to kind of go through some of these maps just to.
Kyle, Councilmember Smith had it.
Oh, I'm sorry.
I just want to know if Napague Farms was also part of Peltier's.
Yes, it is.
Yes.
Yeah, and just to provide, I know Commissioner Haggard called and asked me this question before. You can see that the labels don't exactly match up with where the parcels are. In the example of Napague, that includes all of those parcels from 10th Street all the way down and grouping all of those residential units into one. So in providing a general snapshot of the entire city, it was kind of difficult to identify which individual parcels are included in that projection, but just to give a heads up on that.
And the other caveat, I guess, with these numbers is that these are our best guess. So, you know, for instance, we know up in the village that this number is probably high, given the fact that we have an alignment that's being talked about with the county for 14 and Manning. We're dealing with the airport on airport zoning issues, and whether the runway stays the same or it moves and expands a little bit, there's going to be an impact in terms of densities up here as well. Plus, this developer already has asked to move some of the parkland up north of the railroad tracks. So we anticipate that what we see for open space is going to be a little greater than what was otherwise planned, you know, or shown in the plan for that area. So that's one example. The other good example I can think of is Napague Farm down here around, it's not Armstrong Lake, it's
Kramer
Lake. You know, we know we're going to have some issues with shoreline zoning. We've recently updated our shoreline ordinance. The shoreline ordinance did not take into account, or it does take into account the fact that there needs to be some buffering or other requirements here that will limit development options and potential. So already down here, we know that that number is probably high given the fact that there's some shoreline issues or other things that might come into play. And so you see that across the area that, you know, a lot of times, especially with some of these sites that haven't developed now, there's going to be some issues or some other factors that could limit development, and we know in some cases will limit development.
Kyle, one more
Yes.
question regarding the I-94 area at least. Do those numbers that you're showing there correspond to adding up all the little parcels on this map?
Correct.
For the most part, yes.
Yeah.
I checked a couple of them, but I didn't go through all of them.
The only instance when it doesn't, I think, Chairman Williams, is on the Dale 200. As you know, the alignment of Fifth Street was moved further to the south as part of the Lennar-Savona project. And so I think if you add up those numbers, you'll get to 214 residential units. We just subtracted that by 14 to make it an even 200. But I think, you know, the amount of land that was moved into the low density category by moving the road further to the south actually would limit the number of residential units in the Dale land, depending on what he wants to do with that commercially. But I think I think that number's high, is what I'm saying.
I see.
The Dale 200.
Because you just have less area.
There's less area to get residential projects in that, in the medium density of our land use plan due to moving the road further to the south.
Yeah, the other thing to keep in mind is the map you have, and we'll have it up here again, that shows the areas and kind of a rough estimate of what the development densities would be allowed, is that's looking at a gross basis too. So it's not taking into account or subtracting out wetlands. We're not dealing with subtracting out right-of-way for major roadway systems, those sorts of things. So that already is a number that's probably pretty conservative. So as we've put these together and kind of went through this into this analysis, staff is trying to be somewhat conservative in terms of the numbers and what those future numbers are, looking at more, you know, if things develop at the absolute minimum, what the worst case scenario might be at that minimum. Now we know that we're dealing with ranges, so that could vary a little bit, but again, we're trying to again show compliance with meeting those targets and those overall population numbers.
Now, these numbers, or these numbers, convinced the Metro Council that we would meet our RIC units and population.
Yep,
But
that's
do
correct.
they meet the 3 units per acre?
Did it meet the 3 units per acre?
Yeah, as an average. I don't
Yes.
recall.
Well, you know, if you look into the other parts of our plan, it lists out, we have to list out, and this is one of the requirements to comply with Met Council requirements, list out various land use categories by acreages. And so they're using that to a certain extent to determine compliance with that 3 units per acre requirement. So again, we can pull that chart out and go through that, and if we need to, we can certainly provide those numbers to you as well. But that's going to give a general indication of where we stand with those. And it works for us because, as I mentioned, we got a little bit of a difference with the village area, but we did break out the village land use separate from the I-94 corridor, so it's possible to do that.
Okay. Yes, Ms. Hager.
So, just because I am like a spreadsheet girl, I just added up all these numbers like in your staff report and like all these numbers here. So what is in progress or not in progress, but approved, which means in progress, I guess, and predicted for total build-out?
Yep.
I have 4373 total rec units.
Well, and I can maybe jump ahead.
Sorry. am
So I did do
okay,
some of that.
Okay, I'll wait.
So, again, these are different, let me know, but this is what staff calculated then, just using those numbers. So again, these are still just projections and estimates, but they're a pretty good idea, I think, of where we stand. So what I'm showing then, by doing that adding, which hopefully is the same what you've been doing, is the units approved within the I-94 corridor end up being 1,272 units for all the plats and concept plans. Again, these are concept plans in many cases, so that could change a little bit, but that's the number. If you take that same area, looking at the numbers and charts in the comp plan, what was estimated and so forth, we're looking at 1,340 units. So right there, the city has approved to date within all these areas where we know things are happening or have approved developments. That turns up, I think that ends up being 68 units less than what the comp plan guidance was for those areas. When we look at future units, so this is the area that a little more uncertainty, a little more, not quite so certain, but, we have the numbers from the comp plan. We have the numbers that were used as we went through the work group and worked with the work groups on coming up with the plan. We're showing just under 2,000 units. So if you add all those up, what we're showing for both approved and future units is 3,200 housing units for the I-94 corridor. So what you'll see is that that's generally consistent with the overall plan that was approved by the city and consistent with the numbers that we had in place for rec units within that corridor. So
That,
maybe we'll,
I don't know if that matches up with this, then maybe not.
it should match up with that map. Again, we're just adding up the totals from that map to come up with this, and that was based on some of those previous numbers.
So, well, it's just a little bit different. Anyway, so then residential, like if we were gonna go by the 2040 plan, or the population for 2040, we would only need 3,100 rec units. So it's a difference of 1,273. Our prediction is 1,200 over. And so you're saying that you think that that's all gonna be taken up in wetlands, or?
You say we're 1,200 over in terms of our
Well-
2040 population?
Sorry, 1,273 rec units higher than what we need for the Met Council, if we were gonna go by the 21,000 population.
Yeah, depending on the methodology used for determining persons per household, which we'll assume is what we're working with right now with the Met Council number, which is the 2.5 something, we're dropping out 727 units of housing from the plan to get at that number then, or we'd have the ability to do that. So with the next cycle, the city would have the ability to look at that. Now, the one other thing we're going to point out and put up on the screen too are these areas where we've been doing some of that what we call functional rebalancing right now. So already with some of the changes we've made to the plan, we've been kind of moving towards that lower total as we go along. And that's going to be a discussion that we continue to have with the council moving forward, and kind of an issue we'll be continuing to work on as we deal with development proposals and requests to amend the comp plan or make modifications to the plan, both in terms of the Seward areas and also based on our conversations regarding rural development areas as well. So I don't know if that answers your question specifically, or if you had an additional comment about that.
No, I just, it just seems like I guess I was under the understanding that these things were already, like, kind of, you heard that this is what these people are gonna do, and not just estimate what they're gonna do. But if all these numbers that are in the gold, the estimated figure, if they all come in at that, we'll be over the population of 2,000 or 21,000.
Yeah, and I think what's clear when you look at that map and look at what's been done to date is that there are opportunities for the city to look at ways to make reductions in population. And I know that's something that the chairman at least asked for some recommendation from staff on tonight. We're going to throw out, a couple ideas for how the city may proceed with some reductions to those overall population totals to bring that more into conformance with the 2040 statement versus the 2030 statement.
And that's really without anybody else developing anywhere in the city. But that 21,000 is overall the city, right? Not just the Seward area, or not just current population.
The
of
city as a
city.
whole, that is correct.
So then we're really over.
Kyle,
necessarily.
you're gonna address the Kilo property and then the,
Yeah.
okay.
I mean, the long and short of it is that right now, a lot of the developments coming forward have been developments that are located within the city's low-density residential planning areas. We have larger areas and a large amount of areas that are still guided for high-density housing in the range of 8 to 15 units per acre, which compromise a good portion of those dwelling units in the comprehensive plan. So from staff's perspective, as we continue to work on planning efforts, and we'll kind of highlight some of those efforts that we see coming up in the future, there will be opportunities for us to look at that and look at rebalancing those areas in particular. Now, the council and the planning commission certainly can look at going in a different direction, can look at other ways to do that rebalancing, but that, again, from staff's perspective, is the most logical way to handle it, and we'll kind of talk about that in a little bit here, if we can kind of get to that portion of the meeting.
Yeah.
So, just with that all said, we're now looking at taking development north of 10th Street, which was all OP, where you had to have a 40-acre parcel to put in rural, well, an OP development. If we go down to 2.5-acre lots or 5-acre lots, we're gonna be adding in a whole lot more parcels where we can add population that we never took into account in 2005 because they didn't have enough to do the OP. We only took in properties that had 40 acres or were close to another property where they could combine and make 40 acres. But now we're gonna be looking at other parcels that are 10, 12, 17, 21, whatever, that are not anywhere near 40 acres. And if we allow them to develop into small units, 2.5-acre lots, that in and of itself is gonna increase the population dramatically. And I think that needs to be pointed out.
Well, that relates to my question. I don't want to get into the rural area development questions tonight, but at some point, and I can't remember whether Casey's presentation included this, but at some point, we need to know what is our expected population increase for the rural areas so that we can make sure that we take that into account for the total population needs and the Seward population needs.
Yep. I mean, just quickly, based on our conversations with the Met Council and our own understanding of kind of just talking to folks in Lake Elmo, I mean, the city is going to have a little more discretion over what happens in these rural areas versus what's happening in the urban areas. In the urban areas, we need to follow a requirement to maintain a certain minimum level of development within those areas at the 3 units per acre. Once we get outside of there, now we're dealing more with just general projections and estimates based on what we think is going to happen and what we expect to happen in the future.
Does the Met Council look at this and have they done their own projections as far as, like, for example, what I'm struggling with is this, I guess the southeast quadrant, the high-density areas. Who decided that needed to be high density? Was that us leading the Met Council, or was it the Met Council leading us?
That was us. Back in 2000.
Make up the numbers.
Well, when we did the 2005 plan, as Councilmember Smith has alluded to, the city adopted a very generic 3.5 unit per acre throughout that entire corridor. And most of it was residential with one small area for business park at the intersection of Manning Avenue and I-94. The work group that worked on this wanted to take a more prescribed approach to focus a little more on the actual land uses, land use categories within the corridor, so that there was a variation between high density and low density areas in the corridor. And that was done for a few different reasons. One was they wanted to try to build in some natural buffering and some transition areas between the rural areas and existing developments, and then the more dense developments along the I-94 corridor. The work group also wanted to really plan for some expansion or additional opportunities for commercial development along that corridor. So the 2000 and what I call the 2013 plan, which was updated from the 2005 plan, shows a lot more area devoted to commercial and business park usage along that corridor. So there was, as part of our 2013 plan update with the I-94 corridor and village, reallocation of some of those units from commercial, from residential to commercial, so that we were keeping the rec units the same, but dropping down some of those populations, but also dropping down the area that was devoted to residential uses as well. So that was a very deliberate, I think, action and decision that was made by the work group to try to come up with what they felt was a better allocation of both different types of land uses and densities along that corridor.
But is it, I can't help but think it's wishful thinking that we're gonna hit the densities in that area. And it feels like with the numbers, we've got a lot of eggs in our basket on that particular point. To have 800 and some units in that area. Wow.
Well, we have to wait and see. Mr. Blair, did you have a question?
Yeah, I think the time has passed for it. We've gone off into other areas. We're good.
Okay.
I'm sure it'll come back up again.
Okay.
Okay. Well, let me just finish this thought then in terms of the unit count summaries. So that kind of hopefully summarizes, oh, shoot. Oh, come on. That was there. Let's see here.
You might hit the
Dean, what,
There we go, got it.
what area were you pointing at when you were before, just well?
the southeast corridor, Mr. Mayor.
Yeah, I'll come back to it here. I do want to show that on the slide here too. So just to finish this conversation then, so that's the kind of summary of the I-94 corridor. For the village, same kind of analysis, looking at the number of units that have been approved to date, the minimum number that we're showing in the comp plan, what we're showing or estimating for future units based on the areas and land use plan, then what the total amount would be for both existing approved and then future units. Now here it's,
And this does not include Cimarron, correct?
these numbers don't include Cimarron, that is correct. They don't include any commercial recs or other
Yeah.
type of development. So the one thing I want to point out here is if you look here we're actually a little above what the minimum level was established for in the comprehensive plan. But I think based on that, staff would have a couple comments. One is that you know, the density ranges in the village are much lower and much more compressed. So rather than having a 2.5 to 4 unit range, the low density in the village is 1.5 to 2.5 units per acre. So we're seeing the developments coming in the village are really kind of more up at that 2 to 2.5 units per acre, which again is consistent with our administrator was saying is the minimum that our developers are telling us if they need to meet or need to have in order to make these developments work from a financial perspective. The other point I want to make there too is that again, even with that little bit of an increase here, that is still falling within the ranges that were established in the comp plan. So, you know, that is what it is. We're still showing that the comp plan guides the village for between 900 and 1,100 as a target for new housing units within the village area. So we're kind of on track with that when you look at this particular map. Now, the one other kind of wild card in this, and another point that I'm sure will be discussed as we talk about ongoing comprehensive plan amendments and future work with our comp plan, is how we deal with the mixed-use area. And, you know, quite honestly, I think from staff's perspective, it's been a little hard to estimate what we might see there because there's the, I think, desire to have a very active and vibrant downtown, but there's also the market realities of what, you know, might be realistic for housing units within that area. So I think that's one area in the city that we just have a little more uncertainty in terms of what actually may happen. As staff, we tried to make some guesses as to what that might look like, what that could look like, and then put those numbers into our estimates and into our work, ongoing work with the comp plan. The other factor, another issue that I think is worth pointing out here at the village is that we've heard some numbers thrown out that are pretty intense in terms of what the overall development might be in the village. But when you kind of go through and add up everything and take even the high end of the range within the village, you're still capping out and maxing out at about 1,400 units of housing, which still falls within the range that was studied with our AUAR and still falls from the ranges that were established and approved through the comprehensive planning process. 1,400. Again,
And
using our best guess and estimates
These
at the high end of the range.
These are in addition to the existing homes, is that correct?
That's right.
Which are about 200.
200 roughly. That's correct.
I have a question.
Mhm.
This goes back, I missed it, and I've been thinking about this quite a bit lately, the approved development down on Inwood and I-94 with the 537, originally 687 units. In that acreage, was the housing units also spread over the area, the density division spread over the area where the business is as well?
For the numbers that we're using, no, because that would have been calculated differently. We didn't have a number in there.
Okay, because those business areas, I'm looking at the number of housing units in that area, and it seems like it's a lot more dense if you took out the areas that you were actually using or were putting business in. And then it would be almost kind of like double dipping, so
Yeah.
I'd like to understand that a little bit more, just for
Yep.
my own knowledge, if that's okay with you.
Yeah, and that's when you look at the developer's numbers for that project, that is pushing those numbers up a little bit in their project for net densities because they are taking out a little more area that was devoted to commercial versus what maybe the comp plan showed. So, it's a good point.
But as I recall, that boosted the average density up around 3.4 or something like that, units per acre?
I believe
As
so.
opposed to 3.14 or something,
there's-
that
I heard him say
including commercial?
3.2 tonight, but there was the 3.1 or 3.4, depending on how you look at it. I think you're right.
Yeah, so
Well,
it's not a huge change.
but they took 150 units out based on the
Well,
decisions that you made,
yeah,
so
that-
that also.
That's
bothered-
another issue. I think the council was not correct, and that staff's and council's interpretation was not correct of our recommendation that all the that the 150 unit high-density housing be moved south of Fifth Street. I don't recall that we discussed removing that high-density housing. We just felt that, based on the comp plan, all the high-density housing should be south of Fifth Street.
I think that's how we took it, did we not?
Well, from the way I
Yeah, that is how we took it.
heard the council meeting, you did a lot of discussion of, well, okay, no, we're not gonna deal with that 150 units. We're gonna deal with everything else. Implying that you thought we had recommended that it be deleted entirely, but that wasn't the case. Just wanna make sure.
But had it not been deleted entirely and it would have gone south of you would have taken the acreage out up north, you have to take that out of the
Right.
calculation then your density is gonna go up from 3.4 to probably 4 point something. Because you're moving it down here, you're still keeping the 680 some odd units. So then you're at the 4 point, I mean,
That
if
could
you
be.
move it from point A to point B, that's what happens. So I think they
Okay,
were trying to.
anyway.
We had half the planning commission there, perhaps.
Yeah, I was gonna say, I thought that we voted to move it all south of Fifth Street.
But not
Yeah.
delete it.
Yeah, remove the get rid of the high density north of Fifth Street, yes.
And move it south of Fifth Street.
But
Move it
allow
south.
it to be south
Right.
of Fifth Street.
That's what you said on the planning commission, and that night, you're right. Mr.
Yeah,
Chair.
take the senior and move it up to the.
No, that wasn't,
We just talked
no,
about that.
that wasn't.
Anyway,
Same thing.
sorry. I didn't
All right,
wanna-
let's.
Well, it's clear we made a mistake.
Well, that raises a
I
good,
don't think so, because you would
No,
have
I'm
been at 4
teasing,
point.
the state of that.
it raises a good discussion point, though, and this is something we'll be talking about as we continue to talk about comp plan updates, is how do we handle housing in commercial areas? Right now, with your zoning ordinance, you do allow, in limited cases, residential housing, multifamily housing in commercial areas. So obviously, if we have areas, a lot of areas that develop for housing in these commercial areas, that's gonna change some of those numbers as well. And so the plan itself really, it isn't set up to just be a quota on limiting, growth up to a certain number. It's intended to be a more fluid land use plan that allows you to consider various types of land use and look at the best use for that particular piece of property. And so as we look at the village and as we look at some of these areas that we allow for mixed-use development in the 994 corridor, that's gonna be a question that comes into play is, how are we accounting for those units? I think from a strictly planning perspective, looking at land use only and not factoring other issues and so forth, generally, you're gonna look at a multifamily residential project and a commercial project as having similar impacts on the land, and with some benefits and some drawbacks for each one. And I think you'll find in a lot of cases, a lot of folks would much rather live next to a multifamily building than next to a convenience store, for instance. Other folks may be the complete opposite. They may want to see a gas station there rather than multifamily housing. So those are all kind of land use decisions that need to get factored in as you go through and continue to work on your comp plan. And we've made some of those decisions in the comp plan. We're carrying those out as best as we can as land use proposals come forward. But that's something that also impacts, those overall numbers, where the numbers themselves maybe aren't quite as important as understanding and having a good idea what's happening on the land itself.
I think with that particular one, that unit was 27 or 29 units per acre. And we have nothing in the whole city that approves for that many units per acre.
That's right.
So I think that's why, and they wanted,
And we recommended no
Yeah.
more than 15 per
yeah,
acre.
yeah.
Yeah, and depending on what type of impact you're looking at, if it's just number of people living on a site, yeah, that's gonna be a big impact or much different than what's there now. If it's traffic in and out of the site, it's probably not gonna function much different than a commercial user. So there are other things that come into play there, but it all needs to get weighed, and that's part of why you do a land use plan, is to identify the best location and the most suitable location for various land uses.
And that was another reason we wanted to, or I voted to recommend moving that south, is because of the impact on that first intersection at on 10th Street, the first intersection east of Inwood.
9th Street.
We wanted to try and reduce the number of cars going in and having to go in and out of that intersection. Okay.
Well, you'll get another crack at that plan. They've submitted their preliminary application, so you'll be getting another crack at that one. So then I just want to put the maps up here, and again, we can certainly come back to these as we want to. I think this map's been alluded to a couple times, but this wasn't a map that was adopted with the comp plan. This was the map that really was the working map that was used by the work group to help identify and determine whether or not the plan, as it was laid out here, was able to meet the minimum requirements. Now, obviously, it was prepared at a time when that minimum rec unit count was really one of the key issues and key mandates that had to be met. With that gone, I think the plan still can function as a way to show that and demonstrate that the city's able to provide enough land to meet its obligations for regional growth. I don't think we need to spend a lot of time talking about the plan, but a couple of the issues that have come up here tonight that I think are worth at least spending a minute on is to point out that when you look at this particular plan, the development that we've been seeing occurring, including Hamas West, Savona down here, the Inwood development, Boulder Ponds to a lesser extent, and then the Hunter's Crossing and Pratt property. These are all areas that are predominantly low-density residential with some medium density mixed in there, the one exception being Inwood, where we do have a high-density residential area splattered in there. So what you'll see then is there aren't as many areas guided for low-density housing in the future moving forward. It predominantly is located in the Stage 3 area on the Napigu Farms, Hamas West, and other parcels. But then the other point, and this was alluded to earlier, if you look out here at Manning Avenue, just south of Oakland, and staff points this out in this report, you have a large area that's devoted to high-density housing, where you have a large number of units that are tied up in this particular area at that really much higher densities than what we've seen anywhere with our development plans moving forward. We also have, to a lesser extent, an area down here with the Hamas gravel pit, or at least a portion of it, in the area along Keats Avenue that was guided for medium-density housing as well in the comp plan. So that's another area that I think warrants some consideration. In general, and to go back to the I-94 corridor work group, the work group, when they were working on their plan, identified rough alignment of 5th Street, and by and large, basically said that 5th Street was going to function as the transition between lower density housing and rural development housing, and some of the higher density areas and commercial areas that were planned as part of this development. That kind of logic breaks down a little bit over here. Again, that this has to do with kind of some of the issues that the work group came up against with meeting numbers and meeting requirements. So, long and short of it is that this plan doesn't work as it was laid out without having these areas of high density housing. With the updated 2040 forecast, staff believes the city will have an opportunity to look at these areas and make some decisions about whether or not it makes sense to continue to have that much area guided for high density housing, whether or not we might want to look at some modifications to the medium density areas, maybe look at some rebalancing that way that still allows us to achieve that average of 3 units per acre, but then moves things around a little bit so that we're not dealing with as much development. Now, just a couple caveats there. Again, I know you probably get tired of us planners always having these little caveats, but we do have to follow regional housing goals and policies as well. So there is a component that says that the city must accommodate or must be able to accommodate a certain amount of affordable housing and multifamily housing within the city. So as part of that, this plan was deemed to comply with that. That's something we'd want to review as we look at changes as to whether that's consistent then with that regional housing policy. So that is a question that will come up during the course of our reviews. So I guess you're pointing at more of an issue rather than us having any particular answers or response at this point in time.
Kyle, can I clarify what that means? Just
Yeah, go ahead.
for a second. Working on the housing plan, I just wanted to clarify that the regional affordable housing allocation for each community, what that really means, it doesn't mean that the city has to set up some type of HRA or look at tax abatements or other type of programs to try and incentivize affordable housing. What it means is that you have to provide enough land use, enough of a land use type category in your community that accommodate affordable type housing. And that type of land use category is typically medium or high density residential categories. So I just wanted to clarify what that really means in that context.
Thank you, Nick.
Yep.
Please, yes?
Yes, Mr. Chair, I wanted to point out that when we wrote the comprehensive plan and we had the discussions back in 2005, we were given credit for 500 units of what's the term? Affordable housing with Cimarron. That was part of the plan, so I think that should be mentioned since we're discussing the affordable housing aspect. Thank you.
It's still part of the equation. Okay, so just moving on, and we can come back to these. The other map we've given you is the village. We didn't go into in much in depth with the actual numbers here, but sorry about that. But we did want to show the at least the areas that we're working with here. So you'll see that, you know, for the most part, when we're doing the calculations, we're looking at the land use totals down here and up in this portion of the village. We have future development pending in these areas and over here. So again, a good portion of the village, future developments located north of the tracks in an area that is going to be subject to ongoing debate with the airport. This is showing, I think, the current airport safety zones.
Correct.
There's potential for that to move and shift a little bit to the north, maybe even back a little bit, but it's still going to be an issue that we need to deal with from a planning perspective that impacts the amount of development that can happen there. Then this area is pretty straight. I mean, it's guided for low-density housing, and that's going to be a little more of a standalone project. So then we get into this area, and again, that's where it becomes a little more problematic in trying to come up with a set and definite number for housing units within these areas. We have a large area that's guided for medium density housing right now outside of the village core. Then you have another piece, the Shokin piece here that's about 30-some acres that's guided for village mixed use, which could develop for commercial, it could develop for housing, and so again, it's a little more uncertain as to what happens there. And then we all know about the industrial hardwood site that we have a property owner that in the past has looking for, at least discussed having a multifamily or senior project on that site. So even with we could have one small area here that devoted to a fairly high density development, you know, should that project come to fruition. So again, just kind of showing the village plan. Have that up here as a resource in case there's any questions on the village.
Commissioner Haggard.
Just a question on that map. It's kind of off topic, but all that green parkland south of the railroad tracks is not going to be there? Does this map need to be updated?
It is there. And again, I think the developers asked for some flexibility in determining exactly and coming forward with a plan for that area. What they've really told us is that given that there are going to be some restrictions here in terms of building and densities, that it makes more sense to look at some additional parkland up here versus having dedicated parkland down here.
I thought
So
it was
that's
already approved without the parkland down there.
the development.
Yeah.
The development includes a trail, kind of trail connection coming through here, so you've still got some buffer areas and areas that will be used for active park purposes in terms of a lineal trail, but not in terms of ball fields and those sorts of things, the way the plan's been laid out.
I thought they were
There is-
restricted because of the airfield.
Well, there are going to be some restrictions there in terms of what you can use the property. Again, that's part of our ongoing conversations with the Airport Commission and MnDOT Aeronautics, just to get better definition of what we can and can't do there. Again, that's part of the reason why this is kind of kind of left up in uncertainty right now. That's a very good point, that if there are some restrictions that don't allow active park use under that airport safety zone, that's going to be a concern the city has going forward in accepting that as parkland.
I have two questions, and I've asked this before, but I didn't get a good answer, I don't think. The mixed-use areas in downtown proper, then you have the rural residential in the yellow, there's a couple lots
Down here.
right there.
Yep.
Why isn't that all just mixed use?
That was the decision that was made either by the work group or the planning commission, specifically based on some comments from residents down there that wanted to keep that area rural residential,
That's their
basically.
homes.
I understand, but they would have private residences, they could still be mixed use.
Well, ask the people who lived down there, they didn't want it.
Yeah. The main issue here, I think, from just the discussion that took place at that time was that this area was connected to the existing kind of rural residential development down here. So it represented a logical extension coming up across the railroad tracks. We do have a housing area in here that the Planning Commission and Council took the opposite approach on, where that is guided for mixed-use development. Now that district and that zoning does allow, or does specify, that any home that's in existence on the date the zoning was adopted retains its right and ability to use that property as a single-family home, as a permitted use.
Yeah, and that's my understanding, that's why I'm confused, because there are other residences around the churches and all that, that's private residences. So, there's just a few that aren't, so that was a question. The other part that I wanna make, that I have a question about is the far northwest corner lot on Lake Elmo. It's a drain field off of 201. That should be either,
You're looking at down here?
no, on the lake,
Like
a
down
lot, right
here? Right
there.
here, yeah.
That's the drain field on the lake for all those lots
All the lots
north,
up in here.
right, all those. Is that public, or why does it show it's rural, single family?
The city has not been zoning the 201 sites separately from other parcels in those residential neighborhoods.
No, but that lot is unbuildable.
Yeah.
It's on a drain field, so it's,
And it's city-owned as well.
so why isn't it green?
It could be. Generally, the green on our maps are showing park areas or areas that are, where there's an active city use or public use. I think that's a semantics issue that, for whatever reason, cities decided not to zone those or have those guided separately.
We could do that.
Yes, Mr. Jones?
Yeah.
Getting back to your first question, Commissioner Dorschner, related to the mixed use on the west side versus the east side, I think you bring up a good point that, why designate certain homes mixed use and not others on the west side. Another piece of information that I think that informed that ultimate recommendation, that decision, is that the intended redevelopment or growth of the downtown really has much more limited physical capacity on the west side of Lake Elmo than it does on the east side. In other words, Laverne, Layton, this is the gridded street pattern that the work group and that others who were involved in that process really envisioned the redevelopment and growth of downtown. If you look at the streets on the west side of Lake Elmo, there's really much more limited capacity to expand or redevelop those sites on that side than there is more along Laverne, Layton, and then actually getting into the actual mixed-use area, moving to the east, actually extending all the way out to Village Parkway. So I think that was part of the reason that informed that decision, is that they really, viewed that portion of the downtown as to be kind of the center, the nexus of ultimately what the intended redevelopment area would be, looking at it from a 50-year plan, or in this case 30-year plan. But so hopefully that is a better answer than the one you got the first time.
Making water run if anyone wants one. No? You want water?
I'd be remiss if I didn't go back to the map that I had up previously here that I skipped over really quickly. I didn't include this in your packet. This is in your comprehensive plan, though, so hopefully you've had a chance to look at this as well. This is the city staging plan that was adopted for the I-94 corridor. I want to point this out because as you look at the development projects that have come forward to date, by and large, they've all been located within the Stage 1 area. So it encompasses the area that was served by the Section 34 Public Utility Project to bring sewer and water up Hudson Boulevard, up to Keats Avenue to serve this entire area, which included the installation of a lift station up here at the south end of Goose Lake, which again is basically opening up this area of the city for development. This Inwood Avenue piece was always connected to the Eagle Point Business Park and was always ready to be served by sewer. So that will also tie in nicely to the city's plans to extend water down Inwood Avenue to connect all these areas. So that's kind of, again, Stage 1, and that's where the development's occurring. I pointed out the one project we had on the former Country Air Golf Course site with the Hunters Crossing development. This was a Stage 2 planning area, and the city elected to allow that to develop, mostly because there were some issues with water, and the timing worked out with extending water down Lake Elmo Avenue, and for a few other reasons, most notably that as part of the village force main project to extend sewer service up to the village, the city elected to develop the lower leg here going down from Lake Elmo Avenue back to the interceptor as a gravity line, which allows for and offers up the possibility for development down here connecting to that line. So based on that, the city determined that the developer had met the test for having public services available on that site. But again, this Phase 2 area encompasses most of the area that's located to the east of Lake Elmo Avenue. So it's, again, a large portion of this high-density area that's guided for Business Park, and then all along up to the midpoint between Lake Elmo Avenue and Keats Avenue. Then you get to this middle area, and this has always been the area that was going to be and is going to be the most problematic to serve because, again, there are no services readily available on this particular site, and any development is going to need to pull services from Lake Elmo Avenue across some areas that are maybe not quite as developable as other areas in this development to serve this area.
It's also very wet.
Very wet,
It's
yes.
wet.
It's what?
Wet.
Wet.
Oh, yeah.
You can see from this map, there's a lot of wetlands in here. There's Kramer Lake down here, and then there's some other wetlands scattered throughout the site.
With all, Mr. Chairman,
Yeah.
and you have to remember the Hamas East site is problematic from an environmental standpoint right now, so.
That's this site right here.
Okay, now, Kyle, I have a couple of questions I want to work through.
Sure.
In Stage 1, if a developer came in with a plan that was consistent with our comprehensive plan and satisfied all our zoning requirements and subdivision requirements, could we legally refuse it?
I would say no. If they're meeting all
Okay.
requirements of the comp plan and zoning regulations,
Okay.
no.
Now suppose, right now, somebody came in with a proposal that satisfied all those requirements in stage 3 area. Could we legally refuse it?
I would say because of the way the staging plan is set up, that yes, you could. Now, the comp plan does include I wouldn't call it an escape clause, but it's a clause that says that the developer can show that there's adequate public facilities available at the site, and the council can approve that. It doesn't say the council will approve or is required to approve that request. So I think there is a discretionary decision the council can make at that time that they either can't serve that area or don't have the resources to serve that for some other reason.
Okay. And in your report, you did state that the city has some discretion in delaying some projects because they're not in the right stage,
Yes.
essentially. At what point does the substantial development of stage 1 say, all right, now you can start doing stage 2? Is there some magic number?
I don't know if there's a magic bullet out there that says that, okay, now we're ready to go into stage 2. I think that's part of the reason why it was set up as a discretionary decision by the city council, so that we could weigh a number of factors. One of those might be staff capacity. One of those might be just the capacity or the ability to extend services to the site. Another issue that comes up is going to be bonding capacity. Does the city have the ability to actually bond for improvements that are necessary to serve this area? Is the developer stepping up and willing to pay for all the costs of development? And the other question that comes up during that conversation is going to be, is the developer willing to front the cost for that development in order for the city to accelerate development in that stage? So there's a number of factors that are going to come into that decision. And, at this point, we haven't been faced with making that particular decision, but it may be something that we need to talk about in the future.
Well, and my final question in this series, in discussing the Inwood development, a number of residents from Stonegate and other places said we should have a moratorium on development. Pull back. What would be some of the pros and cons of that?
Of the M word.
Yeah. Just for the 94 area.
Interim ordinance is a kinder.
Yes. Under state statutes, it's called an interim ordinance.
Oh.
Well, here's the deal. When you adopt an interim ordinance, the state statutes specify that you can do that for reasons of doing a planning effort or to undertake planning to deal with some issue that comes up. But it's limited in terms of the amount of time you have to complete that planning effort. You can go no more than 18 months with a moratorium or interim ordinance as it pertains to development or development activity. So I think to do that, you have to have a very specific purpose and reason and plan for dealing with that interim ordinance, which would hopefully include a study and then necessary work to complete a comp plan update. I think from staff's perspective, when you look at the staging and developments that have occurred to date, doing that is going to have a limited impact because the city cannot impose a moratorium on a development that's already received preliminary plat approval. So those developments have to be allowed to go forward in accordance with the plan that's been submitted to the city. So what you'd be impacting then are these developments that would be coming in stage 2 or stage 3, or possibly a couple of areas in the village that haven't developed yet. So I think from that perspective, you're going to have minimal amount of impact, I think, in terms of what you're trying to accomplish over just following your phasing plan and stating up front that the city just isn't ready or is not ready for development in these areas, or we want to maybe hold off on development in these areas until we go through a larger comprehensive plan update. And I think that kind of brings up my other point, is that no matter what you do, I think what you'd be striving for or working towards would be some sort of amendment to your comprehensive plan, which you're going to have to be doing anyway in another 2 years.
Exactly. And the 18 months is suspiciously or circumferentially similar to the deadline for submitting the next update
Yes.
of our comprehensive plan.
Yes, so I think as staff, what we'd advise against doing is undertaking a major planning effort right now to do something that maybe you already have the ability to do, to look at changes that we're already looking at making anyway to the comp plan. So again, I think the approach that staff's advocating for is more this idea of continuing to do functional rebalancing, looking at opportunities to do some focus on some specific planning efforts in the interim between now and when the comp plan is due, including looking at our rural development areas and moving ahead that way. So I don't know if that
Thank you.
hopefully gives you some answers to some of those questions.
Yeah, follow-up question. What is the estimated cost to amend a plan or to do the comp plan?
Full
to
update?
do a more major update.
Well, full update, but we also did an amendment. I'm kind of curious what that costed.
Yeah, the last amendment we did, we've estimated to have cost the city between $100,000 and $150,000 once you factor in all of the staff time. A lot of that was engineering expenses because it was more of the technical elements of our comp plan, including transportation, stormwater, surface water management, those sorts of things. So it's not a cheap undertaking, especially when you're bringing in all these different fields that need to weigh into to that particular plan. And that was just for that 2008 update. Now, going back to 2005, I'm not the one to be estimating that cost, but it was fairly substantial because it was a very significant and different comprehensive plan for the city.
Commissioner Haggard.
So when we're building in stage one, and it'll take how long for them to build, like 5 to 10 years, do you think, to build out these properties in stage one? So what do most communities do? Do they wait till they're 50% built out or 75% built out before you go into stage two? And what's the financial impact of, starting to develop a little bit here and there and then having developers go bankrupt on you, or which happens or has happened a lot in the past? And then also, historically, I thought we had talked about making sure that the old village was more primary focus, or like trying to get that to really develop and be strong before the I-94 completely built out, because then there's no incentive to build in the old village. We kind of wanted to make sure that we had a strong city or core or downtown. So is that another reason to like maybe restrict going on to phase two before we, or until we get the old village a little bit more underway?
It could certainly be. I mean, if you look at the numbers we put up there, if you just kind of crunch those real roughly, about half the units for the village are kind of accounted for new development based on our
Nothing's close
efforts.
to the downtown, or nothing is right there down by the downtown. Everything's like away, either on the other side of Highway 5 or.
No, and I would argue that we don't have sewer in the downtown or to the downtown right now, and that's been one of the major factors you're seeing too, is that as you look at our staging plan and look at development, it's following where the city's made investments or private developers have made investments in infrastructure planning. So I think from our perspective, we see that changing quite a bit now that, we have sewer coming up to the village and private developers are working to do a major extension to bring sewer up to the kind of core part of the village, in addition to the work the city's doing with the county and efforts to redo Lake Elmo Avenue, which we'll hear about tomorrow night. So I think that can be a factor. That was a factor in the original staging plan. The city did say that, we want the village to be a stage one area. We want to be seeing development in the village, either in conjunction with or prior to development on the I-94 corridor. And I think that's kind of playing out with the plan the way it's been moving forward right now.
So then what do other cities, or what have you seen?
For staging, I mean, it varies what other cities do. I mean, I've seen larger projects, not necessarily in a comp plan, but with a larger plan development or the type of approval project, where they'll say 50% build out. You have to have either 50% of the lots under construction or built, or a building permit in for those lots before you're allowed to go on to the next phase. So there are different ways that you can control that more specifically with those type of regulations. Obviously, when you look at our comp plan, the city didn't do that with the comprehensive plan. It just leaves a very kind of generic statement about infrastructure and adequate public infrastructure. So I think, the long and short of it is it leaves some discretion to the city to decide when that is appropriate to move on to future and latter phases.
Okay. Mr. Dodson.
So I get that the phasing here addresses sewer, but does it also address water and transportation as well at the same time for each section?
The staging plan really informs other portions of our plan that deal with sewer and water and those sorts of things. So you have an overall plan, and then as the city works on building out that plan, the phasing plan is taken into consideration. So that as you'll see with the extension of sewer, water, those type of projects, they are geared towards those initial project phase areas. And our administrator looks like he wants to weigh in.
Mr. Dodson, I think that phase one has informed us to go out and get the $3.5 million of bonding. And so we'll be bringing that down inward next year to bring clean water to that particular phasing. And that water hydrology, well, I can't say the word.
Hydrologic?
Yeah, the Mayor Dunn said it. Will basically take care of section 34, and we brought the Lake Elmo Avenue water main down so that we get that looping through that, what was essentially be phase two. So in terms of what did phase one do, it informed us that we needed to go get that $3.5 million of bonding to bring water down to that particular area.
And then that water tower that needs to go up somewhere around Inwood and Tenth, what's the status of that?
We're still working with Mr. Schutte and Mr. Schreier on where exactly that's gonna go,
Okay.
so.
Ms. Smith?
Yeah, and I want to speak my piece here because I disagree with the moving into phase two before we needed to move into phase two, because that's why you have a phasing plan, so you don't bite off more than you can chew. And to get water up to 100 housing units and open the possibility or set the table for phase two, I think, I think we're biting off more than we can chew. But let's remember that when we talk about bringing water up to the old village, the old village has water. So bringing clean water to a place that has clean water makes no sense to me. Everybody in the old village, save a few people, have clean water. Either they have their own wells because they're off the beaten path, or they're being serviced by the current water tower in downtown. So I think that just has to be said.
Well, what else has to be said is that we do have contaminated water.
Not in downtown, we do not. We absolutely do not have contaminated water downtown. The water that is contaminated is strictly coming out of the 3M, Jamaica and Highway 5. What is the park?
No
Sunfish
one
Park?
said we were bringing the water into the old village. They said they were creating a hydraulic loop.
We are bringing water up into the old village, and we are putting pipes into the old village, and we are going to be spending money to put those pipes into the old village, and the people that are having their streets ripped up are going to pay for water. That's part of the plan. So, I mean, we talked about the the sacks, or the wax on that, so you cannot hide behind that we're not bringing water to the old village. We are. That's part of the proposal, is to charge them a less amount of a whack fee, because they don't
Down Lake Elmo
necessarily.
Avenue. That's not bringing water to the old village. It's creating a loop throughout the whole city. It's taking the water that is in the old village and connecting it to the Inwood.
Yeah, and
If I'm incorrect?
Yes,
Couple,
Mr. Johnson?
couple, couple points here. Water main is being proposed to be replaced in the village. That's just replacing old water main, and it's my understanding that residents will not be assessed for that work. It's not being thought of in the assessment methodology is not finalized, but staff is not including that in the proposed assessment methodology for the CASA 17 project. But the point that I wanted to make to Commissioner Dodson's question was to kind of have the rubber meet the road with a real-world example. If a property owner in Stage 3, if you'll remember in the Section 34 project, all of those landowners came together and asked the city to 429 those public improvements to extend utilities throughout that site. And we could do that at the time, and they're being assessed for that work. But if someone made a similar request to extend water main out to me in the middle of Stage 3 via a public 429 project, the city, via its staging plan, could say, no, we're not going to do that. If you want to pull water to your site, you have to do that at your own dime. So I'm just trying to provide kind of a real world, or just an example of what that looks like on paper, if that makes sense.
Yeah, thank you. Mr. Mayor?
Thank you. Yeah, I kind of figure this is question time, so I've got a lot that I could say, but I think we want to kind of get through it. I'll just add that, yeah, we are bringing water down. This is the plan, is down Lake Elmo Avenue. That's the way I understand it, and for the reasons that we talked about, but I don't want to kind of look at it as more of a question time versus
Sounds
kind of,
Sounds like an engineering question, not a land use planning question.
yeah, and well,
So let's,
Well, let me finish up here,
Proceed.
then I'd like to get to a point where I can maybe sit down and do more listening then, as we move on. We talked about numbers, plans. Now, getting more focused on functional rebalancing, this is the question that came up about, what properties are we talking about here and how has this been accomplished? Just noting here that, and this is in your report as well, that since the adoption of the updated land use plan, the city has taken action on certain comp plan amendments which have resulted in an overall lowering of the overall unit counts that are in that plan. And we're just trying to do an estimate here showing what those impacts were. First off, and I don't think is there an order of when they were considered or importance or anything like that. They were just the ones that we pulled out and the ones that we've been taking action on. Is Landucci Pratt would be the first one. I am grouping those together. So that would be one of the reasons for the discrepancy as you add up the numbers. I'm counting Pratt as a development that we know about and that's been approved, even though technically we've just seen a real rough sketch plan, but it helps to kind of pull those together since they came in together as one comp plan amendment.
and that's the one north of the one that we've already approved the
That's right.
plat for.
So there were two parcels in there. The total was about 35 acres roughly, and there were two sites that were originally guided high-density and medium-density housing. The developer came in and requested an amendment to lower that to medium-density and low-density housing. So it was a lowering of the densities within those particular sites. That was in a fairly small area, but fairly concentrated area within the I-94 corridor area. That net impact was a reduction of 122 housing units for that action alone. Next step here, and this is kind of the outlier because we're not talking about sewer development, but it certainly does have an impact on the city's overall household numbers and population totals, was the action the City Council recently took to eliminate the RAD 2 land use category. So just again, an estimate, when you look at the land use that was previously guided for RAD 2, that now is turned back to a RAD category, that was a net result of a net difference of 241 housing units that were taken out of the plan because of that action. And then finally, the other kind of major one that led to some reductions in the overall household totals, once you go back and go through the numbers, is this perfecting amendment that we brought forward that reduced and eliminated the gaps we had in the comp plan prior to that amendment being approved. For those that worked on the I-94 corridor planning effort, and I think this is where it comes up mostly, there were some gaps in the housing ranges or in the density ranges. And I think the work group felt that the low density maximum should be 4 units per acre, and they didn't want to see us go any higher than that because once we started going above 4, I think there was a fear that was getting more into really a medium density or a more dense product or type of housing. What they'd like to do then was leave a gap where that jumped up to 4.5, and that let us use that as the minimum, and it basically balanced out with the numbers and everything. So it really was more of a numbers game to show compliance with the Met Council totals. So this was just going back now and fixing that, so we got rid of that density gap. That created some problems for us in trying to determine whether projects were in one land use category versus another. So I think that helped fix that. But doing that, when you look at all the areas that are guided for medium density predominantly, that ended up in a resulting loss or decrease of 200 units of housing at the low and at the minimum level. So again, that's something that I think we'd have to factor in, and we would factor in moving forward with our comp plan. And in fairness, there were a couple amendments that also did increase the densities, or at least add some density to the overall areas. They weren't real significant, but those were the holiday parcel for the land along just north of 30th Street in the village. And then the wildflower development, Mr. Engstrom asked to have a couple areas that were guided for rural development changed to low density. And in both those cases, it was low density going to rural development. So, 0.45 units per acre, now going to 1.5 units per acre at a minimum. That resulted in a net increase of 20 and 21 units respectively. So by taking those all into account, we're looking at about a decrease of 500 units of housing since the plan was originally adopted. And I think what staff has been communicating to you is that as we continue to work on our long-range planning efforts, as we continue to deal with developments, we are looking for ways to kind of work into our plan some of these kind of functional rebalancing, where we're not increasing densities, we're taking chances or opportunities to lower those densities, and hopefully leading up to a discussion with the 2018 comp plan update, where these get kind of built in and recognized in our comp plan. So just wanted to cover that quickly, and that was I think one of the points we wanted to make here in terms of our presentation tonight is that there has been and there will be this ongoing functional rebalancing.
Okay.
So I'll come back to this if we need to go back to it. Do have some concluding thoughts here, and again, I'll be more than happy to step down here and be more of a listener here than a presenter. So concluding thoughts, just want to make the point that the city has been following the comprehensive plan for all land development proposals that have been approved to date. So all those proposals have fallen within the overall density ranges within the comprehensive plan. All the uses and all the proposals coming forward are consistent with the land use plan for the area that the prospective developments are located in. That includes things like land use, but also transportation, staging, sewer, water plans, and all those various elements that come together in the comprehensive plan. The city has and will continue to seek out ways to accomplish the functional rebalancing, as we call it, of housing units in advance of that 2018 comprehensive plan update. The Planning Commission is currently going through such a process right now with our rural development areas, looking at the potential or options for dealing with future growth and development in those particular areas. That's all work that's going to go into and will lead up to the 2018 plan update, may lead to some other comprehensive plan changes or amendments or suggested revisions prior to that date. Then finally, the city is able to regulate the pace of growth by using the staging plan already adopted and approved as part of the comp plan. So we think that gives the city a pretty powerful tool if there is concern about the pace or the areas or the locations of growth to regulate that and take a more active role in helping manage growth in the community. Other thoughts, recommendations, this is the final thought here. And this kind of relates back to the question or comments from the chair to look at some suggestions or some options that staff would recommend here. So at this point, and this should say staff does not recommend considering any major changes to the land use density as part of the 2040 comprehensive plan, or that's what I'm trying to say. I guess staff's not recommending making any major changes at the present time,
Right.
you know, in advance of the
Wait
2040.
till next year.
Yes, so sorry for the confusion there, but, so we're not recommending any changes at this point other than these functional rebalancing issues. Prior to this, staff would suggest, and this is a suggestion, that one of the things the city could do is incorporating rebalancing of the I-94 corridor as part of any future transit planning initiatives in Lake Elmo. As you are well aware, and especially the council, the city did agree to, did accept the LPA, locally preferred alternative, for an alignment of the Gateway Corridor, which is the bus rapid transit line, not to throw more acronyms and planning terms out there, along the I-94 corridor. Essentially what that means is that the city is looking into and investigating the possibility of having a transit line coming into Lake Elmo at the southern end along the I-94 corridor. What that means is that if that is adopted and the city agrees that that's something that we want to be considering and have in our plan moving forward, is it would give us an opportunity to look at some ways to kind of integrate our planning efforts with some of the things that might happen or might occur with that line. So just at the very high level, top level, having a transit line may mean a park and ride in the community. It may mean a transit hub or a station within Lake Elmo. So if we are looking at doing that, that certainly provides an opportunity for the city to look at doing some more focused either transit area planning or planning around nodes and so forth within that corridor. Staff believes that this is a good opportunity to maybe look at some of that now because, one, you know, we've already talked and had some conversations about high-density housing and how it's allocated along the corridor. But the other kind of point here is that we've already got medium-density areas as well that could be maybe concentrated or looked at being more the focal point for development around the transit hub versus having it spread out in other areas along the corridor. So again, I think this is a suggestion that as we kind of move forward with transit issues and transportation planning in particular for this gateway line, that might open up some opportunities for discussions about how we rebalance and how we look at allocating growth along the 94 corridor that's specific to and takes into account that transit planning.
Are we waiting for any more information regarding the transit corridor?
Yes. They still need to pin down. The cities have passed a locally preferred alternative for the alignment, but in terms of where the actual station areas are going to be located, right now they're very much up in the air. They've identified Keats Avenue as a potential station area. They've identified the potential of an additional station by Manning, but until those things are further fleshed out, it would be difficult to do some major land use planning changes to those areas until you knew exactly where the station area was going to be located. So that's something that we're still waiting for.
Yeah.
And do we have any idea when that's supposed to?
Over the course of this winter, their consultants, SRF and Kimley Horn are going to be providing some resources to the communities to looking at stationary planning.
So, and one of the things, just to jump in quick too, that, you know, as we've dealt with the county and Met Council on this whole issue of Gateway, one of the things the city really has been asking for is if we agree to accept a transit line or a plan for a transit line, that we are looking for some assistance to help do some planning specific to that transit line to take into account that that line now is coming into Lake Elmo. So that has some transportation impacts, but obviously has some land use impacts as well. So that's something that we, again, are looking to have some help and assistance in looking at moving forward here in the near future.
So does that mean that that would reduce, when the impacts, so you're saying that that would reduce our rec units that we would need, or would that account for how many rec units would a transit station?
What I'm saying is that will lead into discussions about where we place high-density housing and how we allocate housing along the corridor. That will likely, because of the 2040 forecast numbers, also lead to a reduction in those overall numbers as well. So it gives us, I guess, a jump on doing some planning for what we think the corridor may look like, taking into account those 2040 numbers. And again, what staff's advocating for is that we do this part of a long-range planning effort that leads up to our 2018 comprehensive plan versus trying to tackle specific smaller planning efforts or comp plan amendments that might be more major and require quite a bit more work.
So, to follow up on that a little bit, for example, on the, let's assume that the southeast corner here by Manning and 94, suppose the transit hub goes there, or station, we might consider moving high-density housing further south than where it's shown on that map to give people more housing closest to the transit hub. That's the kind of thing you're talking about?
Yes, exactly.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, I think from what we've been hearing in the landowners we have, there's 3 types of land uses that are more conducive to transit. It's called transit-oriented development, TOD, to more acronyms. Sorry. There's the types of land uses that are more conducive to that type of, or to a transit area is high-density housing or business park office or suburban mixed use, kind of incorporating various uses kind of all in a compact manner all in one site. And the reason for that is that we have heard from retail folks that retail is not a land use that typically does benefit a great deal from transit ways. So I think we'll want to be mindful of that when we look at this station area planning to see what kind of land uses are more appropriate for those station areas.
Okay.
Just if I may, just
Pearson?
brief- yeah, so we're gonna be looking at what kind of uses would go next to these, and if we were able to secure a stop at Manning, if it comes out, then it would, I think it would work well with a business park of some use, and maybe that'll kind of go into some of the discussion for that corner on Manning. But it would not, when the Met Council made statements, they would not look at it as an increase in density. Just, maybe you'd shift it differently, is all.
Yeah.
That's what they're saying. Just wanted to be
Wouldn't
clear.
relieve us of their
Doesn't relieve us,
population.
it doesn't compel more, just, maybe you'd have an option to shift it, that's what the.
Mhm.
Well, and just to finish that thought from staff, I mean, what that may lead to too is a conversation about whether or not that area should be maybe guided for business park or office or some other type of activity that's completely different from the housing, where we'd be removing some of that housing land use from that category then, or from the city's plan, and balancing it out or moving it somewhere else, or accounting for it somewhere else. And that plays into then what our numbers are for targets and what our minimum densities are within that area. That's just part of that planning effort then. Then let me just wrap up my thought here, then again, I'm gonna sit down then and do more listening. So the final thought would be then, in addition to kind of some of those suggestions in terms of how we might handle the kind of interim strategy for dealing with planning issues, is lastly to continue discussing rural planning areas and growth areas, and as they kind of impact those areas through the end of 2014 and into 2015. The Planning Commission already has been dealing with rural development issues. They're going to continue working on that. I suspect that at your next meeting we'll be bringing back that discussion, having more conversations about rural development areas. So that's it. So with that, questions, and I think I'm going to sit down and then do more listening here and be available to answer any questions.
Thank you. I think the staff has provided us with very valuable information, and I really appreciate your pulling us all together for this meeting. It's been an eye-opener for me. Number one, that we're still operating under the 2030 plan, whether we like it or not. And we're gonna have to operate under that for more or less another year. And then also, the housing units that we've approved, in quotes, so far, are really tracking pretty closely to what was predicted based on the minimum development densities in the ranges. And to me, that's a good sign. I know that many of you know that I fought sewer more than anybody else in this room.
Is that you?
Except maybe Sue. But obviously, we've got it, and we've got to deal with it, and I really feel for the people in Stonegate. They're getting the short end of the stick on this, absolutely. But there's nothing we can do about it. I don't see any way to get around it. It's just the way the cookie crumbles in this case. We need to do whatever we can to minimize the impact of the higher density development on Stonegate and the forest and the other areas. But there's going to be a lot of impact, and I really feel sorry for them. Okay, yes.
I'd like
Mr.
to jump off of what you've said and get on my soapbox that I've been on for the last 2 years. It's soapbox time. For the last 2 years, and I hope the Planning Commission reviews the rural density developments. I'd like you guys to look at the 2.5 units per acre. I'd like to see us.
2.5 acres.
What'd I say?
2.5 units per acre.
No,
okay.
it's late, you know what I mean. 2.5 acres per unit.
This isn't late.
Yeah, this is.
No, we're
this
just
is-
getting
we haven't
going.
got-
Sorry, I'm sorry.
We're just waiting up.
Again, I'd like to see us develop out as much as we can at 2.5 acres per unit and stop any future issues, stop any future stone gates, because as much as I love the Met Council, I just truly don't believe that this is the end of it. If we stick our heads in the sand and think we're done, I think we need to protect ourselves. And I hope you guys take a look at that.
Okay. Any other comments from anybody? More questions? Yes?
Just a comment, or first a question for Kyle. Where is Gagne West and Screeton East and Village North in the process at this moment? They haven't brought us concept. Are they talking to you?
Nick, maybe jump in on Gagne West. They are talking to us about the possibility of bringing in their sketch plan, I think it would be at this point in time. For the Screeton Easton Village North, they're really waiting on the airport for something to take place there before they really know what can happen with that property. They recognize that that's going to be a decision that has to be made at a later date, so they've taken it into account with their overall plans and then know that that's going to be a later decision.
No, yeah, that's accurate. Gagne West does plan to bring something forward in the coming months related to a sketch plan for the Shulkin Farmstead site. I concur with Kyle's assessment of Easton Village North. I think that that's kind of far out and looks it's a pretty cloudy picture right now.
So,
Okay. Yes, Counselor?
so my only comment on that would be, because that's another 175 units, if I've tallied the numbers, we've got about 1,800 units in the system right now that are coming at us with Inwood and Hamas and Savona and Wildflower and everything that's here, that's 1,800. Plus Gagne West coming, I think we're at about 1,825 with Gagne West. That's 2,000 rec units. I just want people to remember that we have 26 years to do this. If we've got 2,000 rec units already in the plan, there is a lot of cost attached to, and I think the administrator brought to us not too long ago the fact that each household is about 115%. I don't know how to describe that. It's something about when you put a house in, tax-wise, it costs you 115% more because development costs money. And so you have to increase your police and your fire. And we have 2,000 units right now out of probably 4,000 mandatory. They're not even mandatory anymore, and it's less than that because I'm not taking into I'm saying 4,200 required units prior to the reduction in the population. And we've got 2,000 coming at us. So I think we need to think about slowing down a bit and figuring out how much do we want to put in, how fast. Because if we go at this pace in another 5 years, we'll have all 4,000 required units in, and there's nothing left to do. And I think that it's important that we look at what the residents have always said, that they wanted to take and do slow, measured, responsible growth. 2,000 units passed in 12 months is a lot of housing units, and it makes me nervous. And I think I've said it at the meetings. It gives me heartburn sometimes for the bonding, the issues that we are facing. This is a whole lot of a development in a very short period of time.
Mr. Zuliga, did you?
With Gagne West, just there's one other implication that the Planning Commission needs to be aware of, and that development's kind of key right now in us being able to provide sewer to 41 homes in the hamlet of Sunfish Lake. So that's why we're meeting with them to kind of determine. I think the other thing that's important to note is that in our pro formas that we've been working diligently on, and maybe Councilmember Nelson wants to speak to this, this is 7 to 12-year build-outs. Most of the nationals are looking anywhere between 5 and 7 years in their build-out pro forma, and most of the what I would consider to be regional or specialized builders are looking at 10 to 12 years. So you've got 26 years or 27 years between 2013 and 2040, and you know that 12 of that, I think someone might have said a half or a third, but 12 of that, all right, is already being kind of talked about in terms of a build-out, 7 to 12 of it. So it's not like it's all going to happen next year, because clearly we can't afford that. And then real quickly, the numbers that Councilmember Smith was referring to is for every home, the last study that credible study that was done, it's $1.08 for every dollar of taxes taken in for every home. And that does factor a little bit into the school district as well, and the city's kind of infrastructure provision for school buses and things like that. For every commercial property you bring in, it's about 60 to 68 cents developed in the range. So we're at about 85% residential, 15 commercial in our current kind of balance, and we'd like to somewhere be in at least an equalized value, 70-30. To try to equalize that out so that we don't put a great burden on our homeowners, because if we go at this pace and we don't bring some additional commercial in, your police budget's going to just triple just like that. So we're really looking for a commercial residential balance of about 70-30 to kind of achieve that kind of solid, steady kind of natural growth in the tax rate that we're talking about. So thank you very much for allowing me to talk. So.
Okay, Mr. Dorschner.
Yeah, I'm gonna respond to Councilmember Smith's, that you slow down. The plan is the plan, and I'll go back to the chairman. If somebody comes and wants to develop and they're within their, and they bought the property, what is our right to say, no, we're slowing down?
Stage one. We were only in stage one. We've moved to stage three. We were stage two. We didn't have to move to stage two. That was we had a staging plan. We've always had a staging plan.
You're talking past tense, I'm talking current.
We just passed going into stage two when we didn't need to, just less than a month
You're
ago.
talking past tense, I'm talking currently. How are we gonna say no?
At this point?
Yeah.
Well, I think Nick and Kyle brought up a lot of good ways you could say that. We can't afford the infrastructure. If you can't afford to bond for it,
But we can't stop the water line halfway in between, we can't.
I'm not saying you should, but we've already bonded for $18.5 million. How much debt can the city of Lake Elmo carry? We've never carried this much debt before.
So let's talk about some solutions rather than the past tense. I mean, I don't think anybody here wants to grow just to grow. I don't think anybody around this table benefits from that.
No, I don't think
I-
we do. Unfortunately, I think that the city has
So
long
it's
said they don't
okay
want
to talk about the past sins and bring that up all the time? And we need to slow down? Let's talk about suggestions for slowing down. If we're moving too fast, what's too fast? If we want to slow down, what's that mean?
I think that the answer to that was this rebalancing that Kyle Klatt was talking about, looking at the 20,500 population number versus 24,000, and knowing that we have 26 years to do it, we can rebalance by taking some of these ranges and bringing them more into line with what the true population should, build-out population should be.
How do we do that with our current plan when they come in within the range and they're within their legal rights to build within that range?
One of the things
Just
we've
the
been doing,
range.
one of the things we've
Just the
been doing, Mr. Dorschner, is we've been asking them to pay 100% of the growth. So, like Fifth Street is a $15 million road, and the developers are paying for all of it, because we don't have the bonding capacity. So if they want to come in, they've got to build that road. And so far, they've all agreed to build that road, and they have to put the infrastructure in, or they got to put letter of credits up. So this growth pays for growth is something that's, by the way, new to the development community. We get a lot of pushback on it, but it's one way to kind of slow it down. And we have effectively eliminated some developers that didn't have the wherewithal to be able to pay for their development, and they've left and gone other places, communities that might subsidize that. So that's one of the solutions, which is if you want to grow and you want to make money off the land, you got to pay for it. And I think we've been pretty diligent in applying that as a way, maybe not necessarily to slow it down, but to make sure we get the credible developers in here that won't go bankrupt, as Commissioner Haggard spoke about earlier, so.
And I give you the credit for doing that, because there's not a whole lot of tax burden going on the current taxpayers, and I appreciate that. What I'm trying to get to, when I hear the posturing of all this about too fast a growth, but given our current plan, and if they come in within the range of the net densities that they're allowed, what is our legal authority to say we want you at the very lowest?
I guess you're misunderstanding what my interpretation is, and that is that I'm saying, a month ago, we decided to move into another stage that we didn't need to move into. Don't say it's into the past, this was 30 days ago. I voted against it. I didn't want to move into another stage, I wanted to work on the stage that we were on, which was stage one.
But
So-
it's done.
What's, I don't understand that.
Can I-
Is this a council decision?
Here's the
Yes.
thing, yes, it is, and.
Something we weren't
And I
involved
think
in?
it's probably not something that should be discussed here, because that's
think
not
we
what
did.
this,
Oh,
I think
Well,
we
he-
severely
he's asking-
discussed it. Can I just make a suggestion? I think, I would.
I didn't, Mr. Dorschner did,
Okay,
he asked me.
okay. Mr. Pearson has the floor.
I would love to respond to how it was put, the Lake Elmo Avenue water, I believe is what Councilmember Smith, and that would be fun for me, but I think you'd be bored for that. I think you invited us here, the council, to witness this, which you're gonna witness, but I guess I'd like to hear from you guys. I mean, what do you think about what we just heard? Does it make sense to you? And if you have a different suggestion, let's hear them. Let's talk about it. What would we like to do? I think we've heard some, how we're gonna proceed. I'm particularly interested in the Manning Avenue 94, maybe taking some of those densities off, and maybe if that we were to get traffic or the transit stop there, if that would feed a business park for the reasons that Councilmember Smith mentioned, Mr. Zuliger mentioned, because it's a less of a burden on the taxpayer than residential. Just simple things like that. But having heard this, is there something significant that strikes you that, in Mr. Dorschner's point, what do you want to do? Does it seem like we're on the path we should be, or is there something a significant departure? I know you're not looking for a vote here, I'm just looking for sign of the field,
right,
straw poll.
yeah. I want some clarification on this moving into stage 2.
Could I
What does that
be
mean?
so bold as to provide it?
Yes, please.
Okay, I think what Councilmember Smith is referring to is Lake Elmo Avenue, and we ran water down to the freeway.
Okay,
Am I correct so far?
Hunter's Crossing.
is that,
We chose to move into and open up another portion of land to be developed by doing that, by making that decision. You've now opened that up so that if there's a plan that comes in, we have to take it. If we would have stuck with one, if you looked at where phase 1 was, it was where Savona
I
is.
see.
Okay.
That's what we're talking about.
Do we have to take it, something in phase 2 or not?
It's done.
Okay.
Brought the water.
okay. Does anybody
You
have any
asked me, I
more?
thought if I could explain, I mean, to your point, is it done?
Yeah.
Yeah, well, we wouldn't have to take Quonset hut, I don't think that meets our design standards. We could take some businesses, we could take like the commercial, what's it, you guys saw it.
Dan Reagan?
Reagan's. You guys
Reagan
saw that,
stuff?
yeah, I think you approved it conceptually, if I'm not mistaken. We could take that stuff, and what would that do for our city? Well, one, it opens up our water. Hydraulically, we need to get the water down there. It functions as one, we're seeing significant savings by doing that. In other words, you're not gonna have to put in the supplements that you would on Inwood. Right now, we'd have to add a significant amount of money, and Councilmember Smith, you know that, if we run Inwood down, if we don't have the idea that we're running Lake Elmo to the west. We can get into the financial aspects if this commission would like, however, whatever areas we'd like to go, but from what we've heard, I don't wanna belabor my thoughts on everything. I'd like to hear yours. I'd
okay.
like to hear what you've got to say.
Well, thank you for that clarification. Mr. Nelson? Okay.
Mr. Williams?
Okay, questions? Mr. Larson?
She was first.
Oh, we can wait.
She's had a lot of opportunities.
So
Yep.
have I.
Okay,
We'll fight over it.
fine.
Um,
I'm just trying to be equitable.
I just have a comment in that, I don't think it's so much a matter of the densities as how we, the decisions that are made address the needs of the community. Like you're putting in all these developments, I feel really bad about what happened to Stonegate, and there should be ways of negotiating with the community and coming up with better solutions than, than the development sort of determining what they are willing to do. Like, for example, the, materials that go out to potential developers. Have some guidelines, like, a little bit more buffer would have made a world of difference for Stonegate. That alone, because right now, Mike, you were talking about how you're having coffee with a lot of people in the Stonegate neighborhood. That's damage control. Let's try to work it.
Several.
What?
Several,
Several.
not a lot.
Okay, but the thing is, get away from damage control as much as we can and find ways of making the neighboring communities so as little as possible. They're not competing for the land, but rather they're sharing it, and they have a chance in, public amenities to meet on a less competitive level. So I think just taking decisions from the standpoint of really listening to the people who are already there, the people that elected you, to solve and to work out problems, and a good compromise is always something, everybody hates it, but everybody can live with it. Instead of having winners and losers, try to find that balance that will create a community where the new people and the old people have a chance to come together on more of an equal basis. Oh, I've got some.
I have a question.
Wait.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, I'm just back.
Okay,
the chair.
that's
Don't
my
let me
statement.
interrupt.
Okay.
Well, I have a question, because I think we went, Stonegate might not agree, but we went through painstakingly meetings and dealing with them to figure out what to do. I think, what is the buffer, ended up being a 100-foot buffer,
Yes.
and that's between residential and residential. And what is the normal buffer between residential and residential
Well, it's been a lot of things in different plans.
Putting me on the spot.
on this plan?
Other communities generally don't have buffering requirements between residential,
I think
but
we-
I say that fully acknowledging
Yeah.
that Lake Elmo is a different
I feel
animal.
for-
It's rural community. Was that a safe answer?
I feel for Stonegate, but you are insinuating that we've just steamrolled over them, and that is hardly the case. We've worked as
Well,
best we could with what we have to offer.
Yeah, well, a lot of it is the fact that, they were promised up to 1,000 feet by past administrations. The 2005 plan, which was put on paper, said 300 feet. And all of a sudden, the standard became 100, and there was no discussion of anything in
It
between.
was voted on by planning commission.
Pardon?
It was voted on by planning commission.
Tons of discussion.
Okay, was that before my time, or am I
Yes.
just forgetting?
Probably was before your time, Ralph.
Okay.
Yeah, right before you came on.
Okay, but you need to include the people who are going to be affected by this at some level. Try to find a way where you don't have endless, discussions, but consider the people who are here now.
One thing on that point, if I can just really quick, one person who I've really enjoyed working with, to Ralph's point of kind of bringing together, future and existing, is Mr. Monteith from the Stonegate neighborhood, has worked very diligently in trying to engage staff about the plan for the future park area in Stonegate. And so I just wanted to give him, a fair amount of credit, and deservedly so, that he's been working to try and kind of bring those two facilities together. So I just wanted to add that point.
Mr. Reeves, did you have something?
Thanks, Todd. I actually, in response to some of these discussions, really want to compliment the planning commission, because my discussions with Stonegate residents they've been promised things that are not anywhere written down and not anywhere contracted. And what the planning commission's been doing, I've sat down with those folks with the comp plan and talked about things like significant physical measures that provide a transition from lower density existing to higher density. Transition measures include distance separation, lot size transition, significant plantings, year-round screening. The planning commission and all of the things that you've done have followed this. So part of the discussion with them is really kind of complimenting and pointing out what the planning commission is doing in following the comp plan and the land use plan. It's a tough challenge for them, no doubt, but this is what you all are doing.
We've been trying.
Yeah, you have, and I've told you all individually, it's really helpful and appreciated.
Okay. Ms. Haggard?
The mayor asked what our opinion
Yeah.
was on the staging, backtracking a little
Just
bit.
on the whole discussion.
On the whole
Yeah,
thing?
yeah, okay, now, I'm not privy to all the financial information that you guys have, so my comments or whatever are minus that financial aspect, obviously. But I would like to hear from each of you what your solutions are, or what your ideas are. But I guess, I think I would be in favor if it isn't like a terrible financial burden on the city, but to really try to do at least 50% build out of stage 1 before we move to stage 2 or more, because I really would like to see the downtown to build out before all I-94 gets full. I mean, so that would be my, that, I would like to, if we could, stick to that phasing as much as we can and really encourage it to go in the proper order so that it's done right, because I don't want to have that to be the main downtown and them competing with each other, so that everybody knows what's available downtown, and you know that maybe I-94, you don't want the same thing to compete with the businesses downtown. But I would like to hear from you guys too, what your suggestions or what your thoughts are on what you are in favor of as far as, or if you would rather just open it all up at the same time, what do you want us to approve or not approve?
I'm not a commissioner.
Maybe we could give more planning commissioners a chance to respond to the mayor's question, and we can then turn the table.
Okay.
Mr. Dorsey, did you have a comment you wanted to make in that regard? Referring to what the mayor asked, what we commissioners think of all those we've heard tonight?
Sure. I mean, well, what I think is that we're doing, we've not approved anything on the high end of this. And I continue to say, I don't think anybody here wants development for development purposes. I've stayed here till 12 o'clock many nights debating this and going over it and getting larger lot sizes to join to Stonegate and do this. And very critically, we've been thinking about this process. It takes infrastructure, I understand that. It takes a methodical approach. It also takes investors. Somebody needs to buy the property, take their money, do the planning, do the infrastructure, build these homes. I think we gotta give them a little credit that they're not gonna come into Lake Elmo with a product that's not gonna sell in Lake Elmo. With that said, downtown city, to develop that, we need the infrastructure first, but to have a viable downtown, we need a population to support it. I mean, we had a cute little wine store up there, and a cute little store. There's nothing wrong with that. Why didn't they succeed? It wasn't because of, we didn't have a viable downtown. It's, we don't have the population to support a small business there. Not to mention,
That's why
they
I
don't
want
have
the
city
population.
sewer, and they don't
Yeah.
have water. So we need the population to have a viable downtown. That doesn't come without development.
I agree 100%.
So that's, I just wanted to say that that's what I think. I think we're very methodically going through this as developers come in. And I give the city staff all kudos. They're working their tails off. They've developed a plan, so there's contracts in place that weren't in place before. They have to put up money and bonds that they hadn't had to do before. I think there's a lot of things different than in past years. And I think we have to develop, we're doing it in the best way that we can. I don't think anybody at this table has been in any of these positions in a city that's with the challenges that we have. So I think we're doing a heck of a job, and we should be proud of it instead of, being arbitrary and say we need to slow down. I don't know what slow down means. Mr. Dotson.
Several thoughts. One was, with the transport hub or the bus hub, I think having a transportation hub in place would make this high density, if it's on Manning Avenue, it would make those areas that are planned for high density more likely to happen, in my opinion, from a market standpoint. I would think a developer would see that transport hub and say, now it makes sense to put in high density in that area.
And is that a concern or?
No,
is that
it's just a
something
comment. So if they were to move the transport hub over to Keats Avenue, I would almost think we should move our high density land use plan over to which
Just a
is-
little inside baseball on that thing is they wanted it to be Keats. We're talking about, they have job protection, or projections, and they say that the more jobs would come out of it on the north side. And so anyway, so there's potentially two, is if that
Oh, okay.
goes.
Keats and Manning.
Potentially, yeah. Keats is if the project continues, if, there's further discussion, Keats is somewhat assured. It's
I see.
whether or not, which I find, personally, I'm, we're working on potentially two, and it's further discussion and whatnot. But I think you're right, that is certainly a reasonable alternative.
I could see Keats too, because it would be across from the Woodbury's city, what's that called, the
Tamarack
city
Hill.
center, city center apartments. So I mean, that's high density across the street from
No,
94.
Tamarack's on 13, that's right.
But another comment I had is for the open space developments, as those come up, that we take a hard look at if they have community sewer. We take a hard look at how that, and I know I harp on this a little bit, but we take a hard look at how they're gonna be run and guidelines under that, because that's a case of more homes on one system is better. If you have, and I've said, like, I think if it's under 40 homes on a community sewer, then you're gonna have issues with how that gets run, like we've had. And then back on the commercial areas, as far as I'm concerned about Administrator Zuliger's comment about the balance of the tax balance as far as commercial versus residential. I feel like we do not have a lot of land planned for commercial. And maybe I'm wrong, maybe we will have more developments come forward that are commercial, but in my opinion, it seems like we're low on the amount of land that we have.
Yeah, I would just say sometimes it's a chicken or an egg situation. Some commercial's not gonna come until you have more rooftops. More particularly with more retail or service oriented.
Do we have enough land allocated if the desire is there?
I think south of Fifth Street, all the way along the I-94 corridor, and then redevelopment in the old village, you can get to that 70-30 balance. And I know this might not be the right time, but that, the mayor talked a little bit about a station on Manning. What we're hearing from the economic development professionals in the area is there's really not, outside of what's going on in the St. Paul Port Authority in some of the redevelopment areas, there really isn't a good business park, office park on the east side anymore. Woodbury's kind of had that all to get chewed up with retail. So we view that the first right coming out of Wisconsin, you really can't count 95, but the first right is Manning. And that has some potential for both us and West Lakeland as a commercial business park or a business park that would also work into transportation-oriented development, because that's jobs. And so I do think along the corridor, so one of the things that we're gonna ask the Planning Commission to take a look at, maybe in the next 6 months, is whether that 891 of high density that you see on the key lowland should become business park. And that takes 800 units out of our housing and our population number and puts it towards that rebalancing of commercial and residential. So I do think that the land that we have south of Fifth is high valued land as well. So from an equalized value standpoint, that 70-30 ratio that we looked at, any piece of land that's got 100,000 cars going by it every day is a high value land. And I think that from an equalized value standpoint, that 70-30 is achievable in that corridor, so.
Okay.
I just wanted to make this one comment because I don't know that everybody, I think you all have a physical copy of the comp plan, which I think is really important. It's a book that, you go to church, you take the Bible. This is the planning document. And I don't know if everyone on the council has read it, I suspect they have, but we did make promises, and I'd like everyone to understand in Chapter 3 of the Land Use Plan, on SRD 3.5, we made promises to the residents of Stonegate, and thank you for bringing that up, because it requires specific development plans for areas south of 10th Street, adjacent to the 3 existing, and they name them, Stonegate, Midland Meadows, and the Forest. We name them, we did make promises. We made several promises. One was a 300-foot buffer, and those have been in other plans that we brought forth as we moved forward. But it says include significant physical measures that provide a transition from lower density existing neighborhoods to higher density regional sewer neighborhoods. Those transition measures will include distance separation, lot size transition, which the lot size transition we were talking about, if they're 2.5 acre lots, next to them was supposed to be maybe 1 acre lots. And then the densely sewered would come after those 1 acre lots, so there would be differences. And/or significant plantings providing immediate year-round screening. The year-round plantings alone will not suffice. So I have a hard time when, I've been here for 10 years and I've been a part of it where we did make promises and we wrote it down. And so I like your suggestion. I hope that as we move forward, we think about the people that live here, and I just think that's a good suggestion. And so it is in the comp plan and always has been.
Is 300 acres in there? What you were just reading?
300 feet, you mean?
300 feet.
300 feet. Is
No.
300 feet's not in there?
No,
Okay.
no,
I
but
thought I
we did make promises to them to have a 300-foot buffer in between and then have 1 acre lots and to go from there. That has changed. But
Okay.
A lot of promises were made.
Mr. Pearson.
I'd like
But
to
this is
respond
in
to
the-
this,
this
but I don't
is-
wanna get into the weeds, because I
No,
don't think
it-
that's particularly relative. I mean, there's a lot of things that were promised back
But this
then,
is in
and
the comp plan. This is in the adopted comp
the
plan.
comp plan that we voted for, all of us.
No, you weren't here.
No, the latest one, with the buffer, with the planning commission vote, Todd, you weren't at that meeting with the 100-foot buffer, I think, Walt, who was at
I'm
that
just
meeting? Who
saying,
chaired that
you know
meeting?
what, I think that, to poo-poo what someone might say as far as listening, I
Far
mean,
be it from me to poo-poo anybody, I'm not saying that.
okay, excuse my terminology of.
No, but I think, but to Mr. Reeves' point, I mean, gosh, when I got on the planning commission, one of the first things that we dealt with were the OP developments. They're supposed to be 150 feet away from each other. So 300 feet, if I'm not mistaken. Well, that never happened. Nobody followed through on that. You got sheds and pools, everything was kind of, so we just had to, by de facto, say, well, that's okay. So I mean, there was a lot of things that went on.
Where are there OPs that are right next to each other?
I'm not saying right, I forgive my right next to each other term, but there were some numbers that were, so things are 1 acre sewer lots, I mean, there are some things, and that's perhaps why it sat there for so long
I don't think it
without
necessarily
anything.
meant
Can
1
I
acre sewer lots.
I mean, that's what you just said.
I
So
said 1 acre lots.
Okay.
And then the higher density sewer. There was a transition, there was a
Alright.
buffer, a
Again,
physical buffer.
You can hear from the council, and if you get us going, you'll hear a lot. So maybe we should hear from you guys.
Well, it's hard for me to say that it's not written down. It is
No, it's
written down. And the old village plan is written down and has been adopted, so, but I'm not gonna go there because that's not what we're here for. I just want it to be known that it is written down in the comp plan, and this is still the guiding document. The
Where is it written
2030 comp
down?
plan is the guiding document until we revamp the 2040 or whatever we do in 2015 or 16 or 18, I guess is our next revamp of the true comp plan.
Mr. Kramer, do you have any comments?
Yeah, just a couple comments. I guess, one way I'd like to see us somewhat slow down is by, following what the Met Council said here is from early 2015, you can choose to have your comp plan, amendment reviewed under either the 2030 or 2040. So I think as early as next spring, we should be looking at the 2040 population numbers instead of the 2030 population numbers, which it's not going to do a huge thing, but it could reduce it somewhat. And I guess that's what I'm looking is just, if we can do some small things to make some small changes that overall add up to more. The other thing is that, the old village, the residential in the old village can go down to 1.5 units per acre. But south of 10th, the residential, the lowest residential is 2.5 units per acre. So why not utilize, why not change that for south of 10th to be 1.5 units per acre? We've already seen how we've had to look at the 60% of the garage width and everything. I mean, these lots, when you take out all the streets and the parks and everything, I mean, it's pretty dense. Even 2.5 units is pretty dense. So I guess those are a couple things that I would like to see. And that, to me, that's slowing it down a little bit by just decreasing the amount of density.
Okay. Ms. Lundgren, you have any comments? No? Okay. Mr. Larson?
One thing that we could do, one problem I have with our whole plan is the fact that it's so linear. You know, it's based, you know, minimum lots this size, you know, and then, you know, setbacks and everything. You know, why couldn't we think more, be, you know, more relaxed about things like cluster housing? You know, an example would be Inwood. We really had to struggle with their concept because you had as small as 38-foot lots, but you also had a lot of shared space on there so that they came out within our guidelines. But it just wasn't in the lot, but it was in the amenities along with it. But you know, where you have cluster housing where you do accept maybe even smaller lots to give more space for such uses as open space for kids to play or for buffer between existing neighborhoods and old neighborhoods to, you know, just sort of think a little bit, being able to think a little bit more outside the box.
Can I just comment on an observation? I think if I understood you right, Ralph, you said something somewhat in seemingly contradiction to what Mr. Kramer said about, right, because you said they're dense because of the parks, because of the roads and whatnot. You're saying provide for it, right?
Yeah.
And it's fine. I think there's an answer. And I'm just saying, I look at that as kind of symptomatic of a lot of it. I mean, if it's all, and this is another, it's all, to me, I don't know that it's all a numbers game. You know, we seem so focused on the numbers. And I get it. It makes sense, you know, how many people and all that. But I mean, I think what we want, what I want, what I think we're getting is quality development. You know, I don't want to, you have your understanding of what you think that is, and I have mine. That neighborhood down there, I think we didn't do a disservice to Stonegate. I look at it conversely, and it's just I think we did just what you're suggesting we do, and perhaps we could be better at it. Everybody can improve, but I don't know. I just thought the contrast there was striking, and I wanted to comment on it. So that's it.
Okay. I am concerned with the numbers. When I went through the maps and the calculations, I came up with some what appear to be inconsistencies and some things that concern me, one of which is that depending on how you work the numbers and the number of people per household, the rural area may need to accommodate much more than I thought we would have to accommodate. And around 1,200 new homes in the rural area is one of the figures that I came up with. That's a lot of homes in our rural area. So I think we need to maybe do some more analysis of those figures based on the 2040 plan, because that's really what, even though we have to follow the 2030 plan now, we need to look forward beyond that. So I'm concerned about that. I think that the high-density residential is going to be so different than anything we have ever experienced here in Lake Elmo, that no matter where it goes, how much it goes, is going to be a real shock to us. And it's something I'm concerned about because I'm gonna hear it from people at public hearings. And you council members are gonna hear about it too. And I don't know what we can do about it. Somehow, if we can prepare the residents some more, somehow with publicity, I don't know how to do it, but it's something that really I'm worried about in the future.
But if, Mr. Chairman, if we keep
Yeah.
it south of Fifth,
Yeah.
and we do some redevelopment, maybe with senior housing downtown, are those limitations or those restrictions, does that ease the shock a little bit?
Yes, and that's one reason we kept the high-density housing south of Fifth, and that's one reason we recommended in the Inwood development, we move it all south of Fifth. Although in that case, it was more the traffic than the
I just want
impact
to make
on-
sure the staff's consistent with what you're thinking,
Yeah.
because we've heard, keep that south of Fifth.
Yeah, oh, sure.
Okay.
Because then it's furthest away from existing homes, definitely, yeah. But it's still, people are gonna be really shocked when apartment buildings start going up in Lake Elmo, of all places. Okay, yes, Mr. Hagan.
Can I just ask one more question? Or one more thing I'd like you guys to comment on is, I agree that you can't be so fixated on any specific number or anything. There's got to be a little bit of flow or play, because you'll never get down to the person, in reality. But when we look at this map and you add up all those numbers, and it's supposed to give you just, tracking, like to see how you're doing overall, like if you're close. And when you do that, according to the 2040, we're already 1,273 rec units over. And then you add in, if we go down to the 2.5 units, 1 acre, I don't know how to say it.
2.5 acres per unit.
1 unit per 2.5
acres.
acres, okay. So if we do that and develop a lot more of the land, our population is gonna be way over 20,000. So are you guys okay with that, or? Well, okay, so if you look at these numbers that are on this map, and I made my little spreadsheet because that makes it clearer for me. But then you look at how much was mandated or requested by the 24,000, and you adjust it down to the 21,000. We need the difference between what we have in the works here that's 4373, and residential units needed to meet the Met Council plan is what, 3,100? It's 3,100, right? And so then if you take that 31, the difference there is 1,273 rec units. So we're already anticipating 1,273 rec units over. But then we add in any open space development that develops, or if we start developing out all the other
Rural
rural land, then it's even more over, I guess. I just want to hear,
Well, I'll address it then.
yeah, I mean, and that's fine, I just want to know, are you okay with going way over the population?
Well, to answer your question, I guess, am I okay with going way over the population? We are required to have 3 units per acre average in the sewer development areas. We're gonna have to do that. So, again, I go back to anyone else who wants to go look at the past, whoever's here. We didn't think the Met Council was gonna make us do X. We didn't think they were gonna make us do Y. If we bury our heads in the sand and say we're gonna do only the amount of numbers they give us for 2040, again, that might be fine for you, and it might be fine for you, but it won't be fine for him when he's living there. Because they're gonna come back and the number's gonna get upped. The sewer's gonna move around. It's gonna get dense in other areas. So frankly, does it bother me if we were to go over our population numbers? If we go over our population numbers and we're in the rural development area and it stops any future dense growth, I'm fine with that.
Okay.
Absolutely. If you wanna say, if you think we're gonna leave Lake Elmo just like this, somebody's gonna be sitting here in 20 years dealing with the same thing with high-density residential on 36, Bergman's Fields, Bershins, all those large areas. So we can put our heads in the sand again if we want for another 20 years. But,
I'm not saying that, I was
Yeah.
just wondering what people's
yeah,
opinion
no, but
is.
I mean,
Yeah.
you're accusing. So, I'm sorry, that's what I took, was.
Oh, I was gonna say, I wasn't, I was definitely not, I was asking, but your
Mr.
opinion.
Klatt would like to say something.
Yeah, I just want to clarify that the numbers you're using, you're going off of the 2040 plan. So those are the numbers that have not been, officially designated for Lake Elmo. And so the 1,200 units short is taken into account, assuming your numbers are accurate, then that difference. So
Plus, it didn't account for the 500.
it doesn't
that
account
we've
for the, yeah,
adjusted.
that's what I was going to say too,
Yep.
is that we're not accounting for any reductions we've already made to that. So even that's taking some additional ones off. So you're looking at 700, assuming again your numbers are correct. But that's planning against that future number, and that's not what we're able to do right now at this point in time. So the overall rec unit count from the MOU, the one that's still in our plan, is 6,600 units of 6,600 rec units. We're not going to get that based on what we've already talked about tonight, so we're falling short of that. It's just now when we project out to 2040, we know we have some work to do to rebalance that, and that's really what we've been talking about, is just how do we get to that particular point in time. So just want to make sure it's clear that, we're not 1,200 over what our 2030 comp plan says right now. This is projecting out in the
No,
future,
yeah, I
the
said
difference.
that.
So I want to
It
make sure that's clear
yeah.
to everybody.
Yeah, that's what I
That's
said.
what-
But they have
I'm
relaxed
sure
it.
what should-
Oh, no, I said the population
Pardon?
from the
They
2040.
have relaxed the population down to 20,500.
No,
That-
it's a projection.
No, it's still just a projection, an estimate,
Right.
and until we get a new system statement, from what I gather, until we get a new system statement, we have to go with the 24,000 number.
And that's fine, but if we've got 2,000 units coming in right now, we certainly can wait a couple of years to get the new system statement, and before we keep, trying to hit all 4,000 units. I think that's what I heard Crimer say, and what
I
have
don't
you.
think anybody's pushing to get it developed as fast
No,
as possible.
I'm looking at the numbers that are, the people
Yeah.
that are coming in and talking to us about projected development that is on here.
So if it's a legal development, and they come in and they meet the zoning and comp plan, how do you tell them no? That's what we've spent the whole night. I mean, it's easy to make sound bites to put on campaign literature. Tell me how you tell them no.
I don't have to put anything on campaign.
I understand that.
I'm not running,
Yeah.
thank
All
God.
right,
Come up with solutions.
Yeah,
Yes.
what's the answer?
Well, first off, the answer is to look at the numbers up in the rural area. If you're going to split down to 2.5 acre lots, I think we all need to understand that when we wrote the 2005 comprehensive plan, we only considered parcels that were
Yep.
40 acres and up, okay? There's a whole lot of parcels up there that are 5, 10, 15, 20 acres, 27 acres, that now come into that mix. So this 500 you put up there, the minus 122, and, well, the column you're missing on that particular diagram is the column that says if we go to 2.5 acre lots, that's gonna change that dramatically. That 500 units is gonna go away very quickly, because we had a lot of parcels that we did not even consider in '05 and '06, writing the comprehensive plan, because they didn't meet the 40 maximum, and they weren't contiguous to someone else to join
Okay.
and make a 40-foot
Then
maximum.
let me respond to that, because I'm the one who drug us in the weeds here. You're talking apples to oranges here. I am. Apples to
No, we're
oranges.
talking people.
The people, you're right then. Then we don't develop the 2.5 acres per unit. But we're obligated to develop at an average of 3 units per acre in the Seward area.
But you don't have to use every stinking inch of the 1,000 acres.
And then
south
it
of-
goes back to, if we have a legal document that says you can develop here, how do we stop them?
Well, I would believe what Kyle was saying, is we readdress this. If
We
have
are
1,000 acres.
readdressing it. We
and
readdressed it
can-
with RAD 2, and if I remember right, you were against readdressing that.
No,
There's four things that they
I'm
said.
saying, you have 1,000 acres down on south of 10th Street. Nobody ever said that we had to put 3 units per acre on every stinking acre. If we have higher densities in some places, some land might have to be an OP, because that's all that's left and needed. They don't need sewer at all. You've already used all your
All
sewer
right, I got
units.
what
You
you're
got
saying.
it?
I got what
That's
you're
all
saying.
I'm trying to say, is that you can still use the land on I-94.
And that's what we're gonna work on as we move forward,
That's-
redeveloping.
That's what I think she
Yeah.
was getting at,
Okay.
without,
Okay,
Okay.
Mr. Zuliger.
and she wasn't trying to offend.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm doing a little functional rebalancing back here, and to try to understand the numbers a little bit. And I'm gonna tell you that based on what we think is gonna happen, you're gonna have to relook at that 891 units that's looked at high density there, because I think the landowner maybe wants that for a different use, okay? And then if you look at the 200, that says, where it says Dale 200, took that out. And if you add all of the growth that you have on here and take the 891 and the 200 out, because that 200, I think, is gonna represent commercial on Dale, and I think the 891 is gonna be something else. You add in the current population that we have, and you're sitting somewhere between 16 and 18,000 people using the 2.56 number that the Met Council is now suggesting, not the 2.75, Mr. Chairman. So you roughly have a couple thousand folks, you know, or about 900 homes outside of the areas that are already prescribed here, which I still think is high. I think our population is going to end up around 18 or 19 based on the spatial analysis that we've done. And really what I want to remind everybody, because it's really hard to get out of the numbers, and it's particularly hard for Kyle and Nick and I to get out of the numbers, is that getting out of the MOU and going to the 2015 systems plan is now a forecast, and there's not an obligation. So if we try to hit numbers, we don't have to hit numbers. Now it's a forecast, we're like everybody else, and if we do the functional rebalancing that I think is going to happen on the Manning property and the Dale property, we're still within 2,000 less, Ms. Haggard, than we need to be for the 2040 target, which I think is going to change. Because now it's just a forecast and it's not a contractual obligation. And I don't want people to get lost on that, because I think sometimes we kind of want to drag ourselves back into that Met Council agreement because we were so there for so long. But we're not there anymore. And if 5 years from now we're not growing, and based on what we've seen the Met Council do and they come out with their next plan, it could be less yet. We don't have a lot of confidence in their demographers right now, okay? So I want you to understand that being out of the MOU is a good thing, and I do think that there's gonna be some functional rebalancing that landowners are gonna say, we've heard from Greater MSP and Mindeed and East Metro Strong and some of these economic development organizations that we're kind of poised for corporate office and office park and some of those things that Mr. Dodson worries if we've got enough land for. So I think that we're going to be okay, and I think we're going to end up around that 18 or 19,000 mark at the most, which gives you 1,000 or two for the other parts of the city of Lake Elmo, which I still think is high. I still think that based on what we've looked at in terms of available open space land and environmental difficulties and watershed issues up the yazoo, okay, that you're right. There's no way we could put 1,200 homes in the open space, Mr. Chairman. Just can't happen. But you probably could do 200 or 300 more homes over the course of that. We're projecting 20 to 30 what we consider to be non-sewered homes, right? Is that right, Mr. Nelson, for the next, we've kind of programmed 20 or 30 homes in based on our historical average.
Per year?
Per year. So, and we're talking homes with great value as well. So I just want you to know that the sheet that you're looking at is kind of what our best guess would be off the comp plan, but some of those things, especially in the I-94 corridor, are going to change, Commissioner Hager. We just know they're going to, based on how the land is probably going to be informed to be used, so.
Mr. Reeves?
Thank you.
I have a follow-up question, but it really is asking you to give us some feedback. But before we go there, I'll let whatever conversations you want to have here on this finish.
Okay, any other comments? Mr. Platt?
I just want to jump into that.
Clarification?
No, I just want to say that we're going to be talking about those rural development numbers.
Yeah.
You're going to have some solid
Yeah.
numbers. Back in 2010, we did kind of some estimates looking at kind of aggressive and less aggressive growth patterns out in those rural areas. That's part of the reason why Casey, our intern's been spending time, and I know she probably hates me for this because it's tedious work, but she's been spending time looking at all those parcels and determining which ones we want to bring into the equation. So we'll be talking about that, and I think that we'll get some good numbers about what we see for development potential there, and that's going to feed into the conversation. But I think as staff is going to be continuing to argue and fight for or suggest in this case, we want to look at the appropriate land use based on what the land use should be for that property, not based on the number that we're trying to meet. And I think we have the flexibility to start doing that because we're out of the MOU. So I think it's really the positive messages here is that as a planning commission and council, we're looking at what the appropriate land use should be given a specific area of the city, not doing planning just to get a certain number out of the comp plan.
Mr. Larson?
I'm going to, this is sort of an overview of what we're doing. We're doing a lot of detail, a lot of talking about numbers. But I want to just for a second talk about the you know, the sort of the concept or the image of Lake Elmo, you know, the rural image. And, you know, we're talking about breaking up, you know, properties and so on. The difference between a rural area and an urban area is not so much seen from the ground as it is seen from the air. Think of it in terms of a plane flying out from Lake Elmo Airport and seeing the patch quilt of different types of property, the diversity. You know, a horse farm here, you know, a small, you know, it'd be a small, you know, hobby farm, you know, there. 2.5 acre, 5 acre, 10 acre lots there. To the extent that we can build that macro image of a, you know, of a community, we are going to be able to maintain the sense of the rural, you know, feel for Lake Elmo. So, you know, let's not go into, you know, putting a house where you can, you know, in a certain area so that everything's the same. But let's try to protect what's different and unique about what we do have. And it is in the, you know, in the rural field, and the fact that we've got so many different types of land uses.
Okay. Yes, Mr.
Just one
Pearson.
more about about this notion of breaking up into smaller lots, taking the OPs from 40 to, I mean, you guys, I know you had the presentation from KC on that. I mean, we're looking at that actively. I don't know that I'm sold on it yet, but I think for those, I think Justin, you're saying, and Councilmember Smith perhaps, that sewer development can't go over those parcels. That's the barrier that you
Right.
say protects the city, so to
It's too
speak.
expensive.
And, right, and that's what part of that is. So I don't know that I'm sold on it yet, but I think you guys are gonna study it and get back
Yeah.
to us on it. How it relates to the roads and the rest of it.
Yeah.
For those
Okay.
that aren't sure of that.
Before I get to you, Ms. Reeves, I have one more comment I forgot to make. The comprehensive plan and the old village plan talks about performance standards for village low-density and medium-density residential. And one thing that's concerned us as a commission and me very much as an individual is the fact that you, the council, have made it clear you don't want any performance standards for single-family residential. And I think that's a mistake, myself. And I know when we talked about the Inwood place, it very much came to the fore. That if we're gonna allow that kind of development, we ought to have some performance standards for single-family residential. So that's a comment I wanted to make. Now, Mr. Reeves.
Can I add a quick corollary to that?
yeah.
Is if, when we have those performance standards, as in the case of the Inwood development, we have to recognize that we may need additional staffing to follow up with that.
Yeah, oh yeah,
individual.
it's not easy.
Right.
But anyway,
I just hit on that. Yeah, you're right. It would be a significant amount of staffing. I thought you could have suggested your standards within that PUD though. Could you have
Yes,
not?
we
I
did.
mean,
We did.
Well, what I'm saying is, you know, what would you have liked them to do because it was a PUD? In other words, did you want a particular roof slope? I mean, couldn't you have
No.
done that in it
He
within
took
the
us,
PUD?
he took us up to a development in Blaine, and we just, you know, if that's the product that they're selling us, you know, I think everybody was really pleased with that product. But they could do maybe, like everything there had a lot of stone architectural interest and stuff like that, and four-sided architecture or whatever, where, you know, they could get these small lots approved and then every house look exactly the same and, you know, no stone, no architectural interest, and all garage doors in the front. And that's, I think, since it's a PUD, we thought that, you know, we can make requests on them as well as them making requests for variances from us.
Well, I guess are you saying you liked it up there? You
Yeah, we
thought it
did,
was
but-
nice,
Yeah,
you
but we
don't-
want to
you're
make
not
sure
they're
that,
gonna do it here.
we wanted to
Well,
make
there's
sure,
no
we made
guarantee.
we made them
There's nothing in
write it
writing.
out for us. We wanted it right.
Did you know, was there design standards up there?
I'm sorry, say that?
Did that city have design standards? Because I've heard that
I don't
there's
know.
no city in the metro area that has residential design standards. And it would add I mean,
Except
just to
for
give
us?
you- No, except,
No city?
Single-family design standards?
Yeah, okay.
I thought we added that
But-
as a condition of approval for that.
Well,
That we wanted to see their design standards. or we
Mr.
wanted
Chair?
to-
Can I-
yeah.
Yeah,
I
Mr. Chair?
just want to,
I'm sorry. I just want to jump in here because there's more information coming on that one. I mean, as part of the preliminary plan submission, the planning commission asked that the developer submit a kind of overall preliminary development plan and agreement that we'd have in place that would kind of specify some of the design criteria and so forth for those structures. So I think some of that information is still coming to you yet. So that's a little premature
Yes.
to say they're not doing
But
anything.
the council doesn't have to take our recommendations.
No.
And in the past, they've refused to have any design standard for single-family residential. And so what good does it do for us to say, well, we want these design standards, and the council just turns around and says, no, we're not gonna do that?
but Chair, that would.
That's what concerns me, and
You're right
some
to be
of others
concerned,
of us.
and I get that, I think I get the concern, and that's what I was kind of alluding to. Within a PUD, you can suggest all that you'd want to suggest, but to say, why would we do that, the council says no, well, I mean, it's kind of, it's an odd statement, because it seems like we've recognized almost everything that you've provided us, and continually say, you guys seem to be doing a great job, so to come to that conclusion seems strange to me. You can do that within a PUD, maybe we wouldn't, but my thought was just that, why, you know, what is it, what's it gonna be? On the PUD, that's separate, it matters. As far as single family, you know, members of 5, and each can speak, but single family residential, I've looked into it, per your suggestion. There's no cities that do it for a lot of reasons that we can go into. Certainly, Mr. Dodson points to a significant one, but I think I have more trust in the market, just like that particular city up there. They probably did what they thought would be a good product, and I expect the same there. But I'm glad to hear that we are seeing some, so we'll see what shakes out.
Well, what you just said is the first that I can recall hearing that a PUD was different in that regard than other developments, as far as the
Important question
council's
for me.
concerned.
Yeah.
So that's good news to me. Yes, Mr.
I
Blair?
just wanted to be clear, are you calling for residential design standards in the low-density?
In the village low density, it's called for in the comprehensive plan, performance standards.
Performance standards. So I just find it hard to believe, I mean, we're in the process of building a home which wouldn't comply to your design standards.
What design, which design standards?
Oh,
There are none.
Well,
for single
what you're
family.
calling.
Theoretical.
Well, okay, let me ask you, I mean, you've singled us out, who hasn't talked tonight? Ms. Lundgren, are you for residential design standards?
You know what, this is, okay.
Wait,
you're-
No,
Miss Smith,
no.
wait a minute.
Ms. Haggard questioned us, I'm just curious. I have a home that would fall outside of your design standards you talked about with the snub nose or whatever you call it. We're putting $800,000 homes in here, and you don't trust that these people are going to build a home that's going to suit your fancy? That's bothersome to me.
I have never, personally, I have never said the design standards are to be this for single-family homes. I've never
Want
done
a
that.
design
The
standard
only
for a
thing
single-family
the only
home.
thing I have voted for is that the garage should be less than 60% of the face width. That's the only thing I've ever voted for as far as performance standards for single-family homes.
But are you calling for more stringent performance standards for single-family homes?
What I'm saying is the comprehensive plan is calling for them. And I'm asking the council to adhere to that. So far, you've resisted that. And so there's a discrepancy there. That's what I'm pointing that out. Yes?
The PUD, the Hanshagen PUD, the tour that you took and what you saw, the only troublesome part of it to me was the fact that out of 687 units, although you brought that down, or we brought that down to 537, only like 150 are the Hanshagen homes. So the rest of the PUD, which was passed as a PUD, we don't know what it is.
No, the Hans Hagen part was 257 or something like that. All of the lifestyle and designer type homes were Hans Hagen homes.
How many of the,
273.
Okay, thank you.
Is that the, twin home, is that twin?
No, that's the low-density residential.
Just the
Yeah.
housing units?
That's the, what they call them, lifestyle.
Yeah, okay. So the other 400 would be, so usually when a PUD comes in, you have a, other 200?
264.
Now, because we took 150 off, okay? So the difference between the 273 and the now required 537 versus 687, we don't have an idea of what that looks like. I'm actually meeting with them to find out what it does look like, because I asked the question at the council table. And it was interesting to me that we would have a PUD and call it the Hans Hagen PUD when half of it's not Hans Hagen. So, you know, that concerns me. And it concerned me in any PUD. It concerns me when a development comes in, and I don't know who the builder is, because we've never done that before, never.
I think we discussed, having the design standards for those multifamily homes, just
There
kind
are
of
design
complement the, low density, or the single-family homes or whatever. We asked for that, and we discussed that with them.
And I'm glad that.
And there's also cities' design standards for multifamily homes, isn't there?
Yeah.
So we already have some in the city. So, yeah, we asked them to complement each other, and I would think it'd be in their interest to do that, but.
But I do remember on Savona, the city design standards for Savona, we didn't like. I remember many of the comments from the people on the planning
their
commission.
townhomes?
For the townhomes. And if that's what the design standards recommend, is just point blank all garages with a door on the side, then our design standards for those multifamily, I don't know that they pass muster, in my opinion, but that's me.
I think we're,
I'm one of five,
we're getting somewhat off the topic.
yeah. And it's
Mr.
10
Klatt, you have
o'clock.
something?
Just that we're gonna talk about this a lot more in depth at one of your upcoming
Yeah.
planning commission meetings. So this is something we'll be talking about.
Mr. Reeves?
I'm actually going to
Question.
delay my question. I turned around and it was 5
Yeah.
after 10, and when I'm sitting over there during a meeting, I look at the clock and I know what time it is, so it's getting late. I would ask the planning commission to think about this though, as we try to work better and have better integration this year with our planning commissions and our parks commission and the council and all the other groups. I would ask you to think about what you need from us. How we can continue to communicate better, feedback, what might that be over time? So you don't have to answer that tonight, but I'd be interested in hearing that.
Okay, thank you. Well, I want to thank you all for a very excellent discussion. Thank the staff again for their presentation and the facts and figures they've provided us. There's lots of food for thought here, and I feel much better that we all understand more what the situation is going forward. And I wish we'd had some of this information when the Stonegate people were complaining about the Inwood development. I think it would have been able to not necessarily calm their minds, but answer some of their concerns a little bit better. So, yes, Mr. Nelson?
I guess I'd like to answer to some extent Ms. Hager's question about handling growth. You know, that's your question, correct? And I'm just, you know, Bill Dorschen took the words out of my mouth when he said, and Mr. Zorger talked about the 800 down there in Kilo. And, you know, we referred to staging, and I appreciate your comment. My comment would be is that in stage 2, yeah, we can slow it down. And one way to do that is to, if you're thinking about that, an option is to turn that Kilo property into, as Mr. Zorder said, business-oriented property, which eliminates 800 plus units, plus the 500 we've already eliminated. We're past your 1273 already. So my point is that I think the commission and the council, with great help from the staff, has been working on this all year. 2 years, 3 years, 10 years for Ms. Smith. I mean, this is a lot of planning, a lot of time. But since we passed that MOU, passed the comp plan, got rid of the MOU, I think we've made great strides collectively to be better at this. If we all had our druthers, if I had my druthers, we'd have no growth, but we do. So now we're handling it. And you know, if we decide to slow down and it ends up being stage 2, just remember that's commercial, and we need to We need more commercial.
Commercial.
And the thing about the commercial, the water line that's down there, they, the landowners and developers, have to pay for that pipe to go from Lake Elmo to their development. So if the guy in the farthest east end wants pipe and no one else does, he has to pay for all that pipe all the way down. All right, so, I mean, it's,
Self-policing.
It's not commercial yet, though. Kilo, right?
no, but I'm just saying, like, if the corner of Manning or Emerson's properties, if you wanted it. So, in the end, I think we're all working towards the same point of reasonable growth. We have a comp plan, we've all said it, we have a comp plan, let's work through it. There's no reason to go to stage 3, we all agree with that, I think, I heard that tonight. You know, let's work through stage 1 the best we can. Thank you for letting me make that comment.
Okay, thank you.
Remember downtown summit tomorrow night at 6:30 at the church. Hope that you can all be there. Staff worked very hard on that one too.
Dean,
I'd like
that's
to
at
thank the
6:30 though,
council for
right?
coming too.
6:30.
Yes, that is an error in your packet. That is 6:30 tomorrow night.
6:30.
Not 7.
6:30 to 9. And you'll hear about 2 important things: sewer to the old village and the drainage plan.
Okay, thank you.
Ms. Haggard would like the floor.
I just
All right.
wanted to thank the
Ms. Haggard,
council for
one-
coming. That's all. I just really appreciate the council coming.
Welcome
Yeah.
to our world, endless
Thank you all.
discussions.
Thank you. We are adjourned.
I think we should maybe have a